Chapter 25, Part 2 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 25, Marooned, Part 2. "My dear fellow," I began. Yes, to my credit be it spoken, I said dear fellow. You don't know what you are doing. I speak for your own sake. Think what people will say. Every one will see why you left her. And you don't want to leave her, you know. Of course you don't. You love Miss Guest. She loves you. Not all the crystal eyes in the world can make you the fashion, if the eyes of your fiancée are red with tears because you jilted her when you found out she was only herself. People don't like such things. They won't have their artists cold and calculating. It isn't done. You can't afford to have squeezed break a heart in this fashion. It will ruin your reputation." So I argued with a certain eloquence, forcing conviction, until with a fierce gesture Bailey snatched 6 collars from his bag and flung them on the bed. Seeing thus clearly what I thought showed him what others were sure to think, and the world's opinion was life itself to Bailey. He was cowed, then conquered. At last I dared to say, "May I?" He nodded. Instantly I tore the letters into as many pieces as there were collars. Afterward, when we walked off the boat, arm in arm, I dropped them into the water. We got back to the engineers before the picnickers had finished their belated Turkish coffee. Bailey took the vacant chair between Miss Guest and Monty Gilder. Biddy said that she had asked to have some coffee kept hot for me. I needed it. That is what delayed our start for Philae, and is, I suppose, why everything that took place there afterward happened exactly as it did. If we had left the dam an hour earlier, there would have been no excuse to stop for sunset at the temple which those who love it call the Pearl of Egypt. As it was, but that comes afterward. When Strabo went from Syene to Philae, he drove in a chariot with the prefect of that place, through a very flat plain, and on both sides of their road, I fear for their bones it was a rough one, rose blocks of dark, hard rock resembling Hermes towers. Nearly 2,000 years later we were rowed to the same temple, across an immensely deep, vast sheet of shining crystal. We lolled, I am fond of that word, though aware that it's reserved for villainesses, in galleys painted in colours so violent that they looked like tropical birds. They were a-winged and convulsively propelled by Nubians whose veins swelled in their full black throats, and whose ebony faces were plastered with a greyish froth of sweat. Each pressed a great toe, like a dark-skinned potato, on the seat in front of him for support in the fierce effort of rowing. Turbans were torn off shaved, perspiring heads, and even skull-caps went in the last extreme. Wild animals were chanted to all the handiest saints to grant aid in the terrible undertaking. An eagle-eyed child at the steering-wheel gazed pityingly at his agonized elders. And then, just as you expected the whole crew to fall dead from heart failure, they chuckled with glee at some joke of their own. There was always breath and energy enough to spare when they wanted it. But what would you? The labourer must be worthy of his hire, and a little something over. When Strabo saw Philae, she was a distant neighbour of the mighty cataracts. Now the waters which once rushed down are prisoned by the great dam, and stand enslaved, to wall the temple round like a great pearl in a crystal case. She is the true bride of the Nile, for, as long ago the fairest of maidens gave herself to the water as a sacrifice, so Philae gives herself for the life of the people. She drowns, but in death she is more beautiful than when the eyes of the old historian beheld her, glowing with the colours of her youth, yet already old, deserted by gods and priests and worshippers. Now she has worshippers from the 4 ends of the earth, and the greatest singers of the world chant her funeral hymn. For in all Egypt, with its many temples of supreme magnificence, there is nothing like Philae. None can forget her. None can confuse her identity for a moment with that of any other monument of a dead religion. And if she were the only temple in Egypt, Egypt would be worth crossing the ocean to see, because of this dying pearl in its crystal case. Venus rose from the sea. Philae, the marriage temple of Osiris and Isis, Venus of Egypt, sinks into the sea of waters poured over her by Khnum, god of the cataracts. Thus the great enchantress sings her swan song to touch the heart of the world, her fair head afloat like a sacred lotus on the gleaming water. I think there were few among us who did not fancy that they heard that song, as our Nubian men rowed across the sea stored up by the great barrage. From far away we saw a strange apparition, as of a temple rising from the waters. It seemed unreal at first, a mere mirage of a temple. Then it took solid outline, darkly cut in silver, a low, column-supported roof, a pylon towering high, and to the south, separated from both these, a thing that might have been a huge wreath of purple flowers. We knew, however, from too many photographs and postcards, that this was Pharaoh's bed, the unfinished temple of Augustus and Trajan, standing on a flooded island. Our boat glided close to the flower-like stems of the columns supporting the low roof. Far down in the clear depths we could see the roots of the pillars, or their phantom reflections. And in the light of afternoon the water was so vivid a green that the colour of it seemed to have washed off from the painted stones. Onto this roof we scrambled, up a flight of steps, and found that we were not to have Philae to ourselves. There were other boats, other tourists, but we pretended that they were invisible, and they played the same game with us. Ignoring one another, the rival bands wandered about, wondered what the place would be like with the water down, quoted poetry and guide-books, and climbed the pylon. From that height the kiosk called Pharaoh's bed showed a mirrored double, like an old ivory casket with jewelled sides, piled full of a queen's emeralds. We loitered, we explored, and having descended sat down to rest, dangling irreverent feet over beryl depths, splashed with gold. Thus we whiled away an hour, perhaps. Then the set, impressed at first, had had enough of the Mermaid Temple's tragic beauty. Sir John Biddle reminded me that it had been a long day for the ladies, and very hot. Hadn't we better get back to the Enchantress before sunset? But that was exactly what some of us did not want to do. The matter was finally settled by retaining our one small boat, with 2 rowers, and sending off the 2 larger galleys with their full complement of passengers, excepting only Mrs. Jones, Miss Gilder, Antoun Effendi, the melancholy Cleopatra, and the guilty shepherd of the flock, who knew he had no business to desert his sheep. He did, nevertheless, feel, poor brute, that after such a day he had earned a little pleasure, and accordingly proceeded to snatch it from fate, despite disapproving glances. Punishment, however, fell as soon as it was due. I had stayed behind with the intention of amusing Bridget, but Monty took her from me, as if she had bought the right to use my childhood's friend whenever it suddenly occurred to her to want a chaperone. Instead of Biddy I got Cleopatra, and by this time, so far as we knew, all tourists save ourselves had gone. I knew in my heart that, in accusing Monty Gilder of claiming Bridget O'Neill because she was paying her expenses, I did the girl an injustice. Monty was afraid of herself with Anthony. I saw that plainly, since the fact had been laid under my nose by Mrs. East. She feared the glamour of this magical place, perhaps, and felt the need of Biddy's companionship to keep her strong, not realizing that anyone else was yearning for the lady. This was the whole front of her offending, yet I was so disappointed that I wanted to be brutal. Without Biddy I should wish but to howl at the sunset, as a dog bays at the moon. And feeling thus, I may not have made myself too agreeable to Cleopatra. In any case, after we had sat in silence for a while, waiting for a sunset not yet ready to arrive, she turned reproachful eyes upon me. "Lord Ernest," she said, "I think you had better go and join Monty." "Why?" I surlily inquired. "I thought you thought that idea of yours was too late to be of any use now." "I do think so," she replied. "Everything interesting is now too late. Still, you'd better go." "Are you tired of me?" I stupidly catechized her. "Well, I feel as if I should like to be alone in this wonderful place. I want to think back." "I see," said I, scrambling up from my seat on the edge of the temple roof, and trying not to show by my expression that I was pleased, or that both my feet had gone to sleep. "In that case, I'll leave you to the spooks. May none but the right ones come." "Thank you," she returned dryly, and I limped off, walking on air, tempered with pins and needles. Joy! My luck had turned. At the top of the worn stone stairway, cut in the pylon, I met Biddy. She was dim as one of Cleopatra's Ptolemaic ghosts, in the darkness of the passage, but to me that darkness was brighter than the best thing in sunsets. "Salutation to Caesar from one about to die!" I ejaculated. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean that both my feet are fast asleep, and I shall certainly fall and kill myself if I try to go one step further, up or down." "You, the climber of impossible cliffs after sea-birds' nests," she laughed. But she stood still. "I'm after something better than sea-birds' nests now," said I. "The question is, whether it's not still more inaccessible." "Are you talking about Monty?" she wanted to know, in a whisper. "Sit down and I'll tell you," was my answer. "Oh, not here at the top of the steps, if it's anything as private as that," Biddy objected, all excitement in an instant. "Let's come into a tiny room off the stairway, which the guardian showed me a few minutes ago. There's a bench in it. You see, he's up there on the pylon roof now with Monty and Captain Fenton. I can't call him Antoun when I talk to you, it's too silly, and he'll probably be coming down in a minute. Then, if we stop where we are, we'll have to jump up and get out of the way to let him pass. And he's sure to linger and work off his English on us. I don't think we'll want to be interrupted that way, do you?" "No, nor any other way," I agreed. "Oh, but what about the sunset? We may miss it." "Hang the sunset! Let it slide down behind the dam if it likes." "I don't wonder you feel so, you poor dear," Biddy sympathized, "when it's a question of Monty, and all our hopes going to pieces, the way they are doing, every minute. There isn't a second to lose." So we went into the little room in the tower, which was lit only by a small square opening over our heads. We sat down on the bench. It was beautifully dark. I began to talk to Biddy. We had forgotten my feet, and I forgot Mrs. East. But I must tell what was happening to her at the time, as I learned afterward through the confession of an impenitent, before I begin to tell what happened to us. Otherwise the situation which developed can't be made clear. I left Cleopatra calling spirits from the vasty deep, or rather one spirit, the spirit of Antony. I am morally sure that any other would have been de trop. And sailing to her across the wide water from Shalal came Marcus Antonius Lark. I can't say whether she considered him an answer to her prayer or a denial of it. Anyhow, there he was, better perhaps than nobody, until she learned from his own lips, tactless though ardent lips, that he had come from Cairo to Aswan, from Aswan to Philae to see her. Then she took alarm, and remarked in the old, conventional way of women, that they'd better go look for the others. But Sir Marcus hadn't spent his time, money, and grey matter in hurrying to Philae from Shalal for nothing. Finding himself too late to catch us at Aswan, he had paid for a special train in order to follow his enchantress, the lady, and the boat. Taking a felucca with a fine spread of canvas and many rowers, which characteristically he bargained for at the Shalal landing-place, he sailed across to the moored steamer, only to learn from Kruger that we had gone on our expedition to Philae. That meant a long sail and row for the impatient lover. For us, the longer it was, the better, one of the chief charms of our best day. But for him it must have been tedious, despite a good breeze that filled the sails and helped the rowers. On his way to the temple he met galleys going home to the Enchantress Isis. An instant's shock of disappointment, and then the glad relief of realizing that the one he sought was still at the place where he wished to find her. There were only 4 obstacles which might prevent an ideal meeting. The names of these obstacles in his mind were Jones, Gilder, Fenton, and Borrow, and being an expert in abolishing obstacles, the great Sir Marcus began to map out a plan of action. Luckily for him, our small boat had moved out of Cleopatra's sight, as she sat and dreamed on the low temple roof, while we 4 obstacles disported ourselves on different paths of the high pylon. The 2 Nubians wished to play a betting game with a kind of Egyptian jackstones, and it was not desirable that the pensive lady should behold them doing it. Observing the graceful figure of Mrs. East silhouetted against the sky's eternal flame of blue, and at the same time noticing that she could not see the waiting boat, Sir Marcus got his inspiration. He knew that the 4 obstacles were somewhere about the temple. Now was his great chance while they were out of the way, and if he resolved to play them a trick, perhaps he salved his conscience by telling it that the obstacles, male and female, ought to thank him. Cleopatra probably thought, if she glanced up to see his boat, "Oh dear, another load of tourists," and promptly looked down to avoid the horrid vision. By the time Sir Marcus came within how-do-you-do distance, he had bribed our waiting boatman to row away. This in order not to be caught in a lie. With our Nubians and their craft out of his watery way, he was free to fib when the time came. "Go look for the others?" he echoed Mrs. East's proposal. "Why, they've gone. I met them." "Gone, and left me behind when they knew I was here?" she exclaimed. "They can't have done such a thing." "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," replied Sir Marcus presently. "They certainly have gone. I met the boat. Borrow was expecting me today, you know, or maybe you didn't know. And when he saw me in my felucca, he stopped his to explain that evidently there'd been a contretemps. I'm sure Lark mispronounced that word. The temple guardian said a gentleman had arrived and taken the lady who was waiting off in a boat. Of course, Borrow thought I had come along and persuaded you to go with me, after telling the guardian to let him know. I expect the guardian's got mighty little English, and they say white ladies all look alike to blacks. He must have mixed you up with some other lady. I suppose my folks haven't been the only people at Philae since you came?" Mrs. East admitted that a number of creatures had come and gone, but she thought all had vanished before the departure of the galleys. "You see you thought wrong. That's all there is to it," Sir Marcus assured her, and having taken these elaborate measures to secure the ladies' society for himself alone, Nubian rowers don't count, he proceeded to lure her hastily into his own boat, lest any or all of the obstacles should arrive to spoil his coup. That was the manner of our marooning. At the time we were ignorant of what was happening behind our backs, the sunset, for instance, and the only available boat calmly rowing away from the drowned temple of Philae. We were thinking of something else, and so was Sir Marcus, or he would not have forgotten the repentant promise he had made of himself soon to send back a boat and take us off. We were therefore in the position of unrehearsed actors in a play who don't know what awaits them in the next act, while those who may read this can see the whole situation from above, below, and on both sides. 4 of us, marooned at Philae, not knowing it, and night coming on. End of chapter 25, part 2. Chapter 26 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 26. What We Said, What We Heard. "Biddy, you were never wiser in your life," I exploded as I got her on the bench. "You warned me there wasn't a second to lose. I've lost years already, and I can't stand it the 60th part of a minute longer without telling you how I love you." "My goodness!" gasped Biddy. "Do be serious for once, Duffer. This is no time for jokes. Don't you know you've delayed and delayed in spite of my advice till you've practically lost that girl? And if there's any chance left, the only chance I want is with you," I said. "Darling, I want you with my heart and soul, and all there is of me. Have I any chance?" "And how long since you were taken this way?" demanded Biddy, at her most Irish, staring at me through the darkness of the little dim room in the pylon. "Ever since you were an adorable darling of 4 years," I assured her. "Only I was interrupted by going to Eton and Oxford, and your being married. But the love has always been there, in a deep undertone. The music's never stopped once. It never could. And when I saw you on the Laconia—" "You fell in love with Monty!" Breathlessly she cut me short. "Nothing of the kind," I contradicted her fiercely. "You ordered me to fall in love with Miss Gilder. I objected politely. You overruled my objections, or tried to. I let you think you had. And for a while after that, you know perfectly well, Biddy, the set gave me no time to think any thoughts at all, connected with myself." "You poor fellow, you have been a slave." The soft-hearted angel was caught in the trap set for her pity. "And a martyr, a double-dyed martyr. I deserve a reward. Give it to me, Biddy, promise, here in this beautiful marriage temple, to marry me. Let me take care of you all the rest of your life." "My patience, a nice reward for you," she snapped. "Let you be hoist by the same petard that's always lying around to hoist me? What do you think of me, Duffer, after all the proofs we've just had of the dangerous creature I am? Why, the whole trouble at Luxor was on my account. Even you must see that. Monny and I wouldn't have been let into Rashid's house if those secret men hadn't persuaded him to play into their hands and revenge himself on you men as well as on us for interfering with Mabel. It was their plot, not Rashid's, we escaped from. And it was theirs at the Temple of Mut, too. Rashid was only their cat's paw, thinking he had played his own hand. Just what they wanted to do I can't tell, but I can tell from what one of them said to Monny in the temple that they took her for Richard O'Brien's daughter. Poor child, her love for me and all her affectionate treatment of me must have made it seem likely enough to them that she was Esmé, safely disguised as an important young personage to travel with her stepmother. Bedr must have assured his employers that he was certain the pale girl was really Miss Gilder, so they thought the other one with me must be Esmé. You can't laugh at my fears any more, and I ask you again, what do you think of me to believe I'd mix you up in my future scrapes?" "I think you're the darling of the world," said I, "and my one talent, as you must have noticed, is getting people out of scrapes. It'd be wasted if I can't have you. Besides, under the wing of an embassy no one will dare try and steal you, or blow you up. We'll be diplomats together, Biddy. Come, you say I've duffed all my life to get what I wanted. Certainly I've done a lot of genuine duffing in love, but do bear out your own expressed opinion of the work by saving it from failure. Couldn't you try and like me a little, if only for that? You were always so unselfish." "Hush!" said Biddy, suddenly. "Hush!" "Do you hate me, then? Is it by any chance Anthony you love?" "No, no! Hold your tongue, Duffer." "No, to both questions? I shan't stop till you answer." "No, to both, then. Now will you be silent?" "Not unless you say you do care for me." "Yes, yes, I do care. But shh! Don't you hear they're talking just outside that window in the wall? If you can't keep a still tongue in your head, then for all the saints, whisper!" Her brogue was exquisite, and so was she. I worshipped her. When I slipped my arm round her waist, she dared not cry out. The same when I clasped her hand. Things were coming my way at last, and if I put my lips close against her ear I could whisper as low as she liked. I liked it too, and I loved the ear. She was right. They were, indeed, talking just outside the window, Monny Gilder and Anthony Fenton. The prologue was evidently over, and the first act was on. It began well, with a touch of human interest certain to please an audience. But unfortunately for every one concerned, this was a private rehearsal for actors only, not a public performance. Biddy and I had no business in the dark auditorium. We were deadheads. We had sneaked in without paying. The situation was one for a nightmare. "For heaven's sake let me cough, or knock something over," I implored Biddy's ear, which, it struck me at the moment, was more like a flower than an unsympathetic shell, best similes to the contrary. Who could have imagined that it would be so heavenly a sensation to have your nose tickled by a woman's hair? "There's nothing you can knock over but me," Biddy retorted, as fiercely as she could in a voice no louder than a mosquito's, "and if you cough I'll know you're a dog in the manger." "Why?" curiosity forced me to pursue. "Because, you donkey, you say you don't want her yourself, yet you won't give your best friend a chance." "Can't be a dog and a donkey at the same time," I murmured. "Choose which and stick to it, if you want me to know what you mean." "Why, you man, don't you see, if we interrupt at such a moment, and such a conversation, they can never begin where they left off? If you'd wanted her, I'd have tried to save her for you, at any cost. But as you don't, for goodness sakes give the two their chance to come to an understanding. Now be still, I tell you, or they may hear us. We can't just sit and eavesdrop. Stop your ears, then. It'll take both hands. It would, which is the reason I didn't do it. That would have been asking too much of the most honourable men in the circumstances." Meanwhile the two outside went on talking. Believing themselves to be alone with the sunset, there was no reason to lower their voices. They spoke in ordinary tones, though what they said was not ordinary, and we on the other side of the little unglazed window could not help hearing every word. "I've been wanting to say it for a long time." In a voice like that of a penitent child Monny was following up something we had fortunately lost. "Only how could I begin it? I don't see even how I did begin, exactly. It's almost easy, though, since I have begun. I was horrid, horrid. I can't forgive myself, yet I want you to forgive me for doing your whole race a shameful injustice, for not understanding it, or you, or anything. You've shown me what a modern Egyptian man can be, in spite of things I've read and heard, and been silly enough to believe. Oh, it isn't just that you come from some great family, and that you could call yourself a prince if you liked, as Lord Ernest says. He's told me how you could have had a fortune, and a great place in your country if you'd reconcile yourself with your grandfather in Constantinople, but that you won't because it would mean going against England. It isn't your position, but what you are, that has made me see how small and ridiculous I've been, Antoun Effendi. Can you possibly forgive me for the way I treated you at first, now I've confessed and told you I'm very, very sorry and ashamed? I would forgive you if there were anything to forgive, Anthony answered, and it must have taken pretty well all his immense self-control to go on speaking to the girl in French, an alien language, just then. Perhaps there would be something to forgive if I weren't on my side a great deal more to blame than you. Will you let me confess? If you wish. Only you needn't, for I've deserved— I do wish. But first, will you answer me a question? I'm sure you wouldn't ask me a question I oughtn't to answer. It's only this. Did Ernest Borrow tell you anything else about me? Nothing, except his opinion of you, and you must know that by this time. I think I do, or Mrs. Jones, or Mrs. East. Neither have, for any reason, advised you to apologize to me for what you very nobly felt was wrong in your conduct? No, not a soul has advised me. If they had— She didn't finish, but Biddy and I both knew the Monty habit of conscientiously going against advice. Thank you. You've changed your opinion of me, then, without urging from outside? It has all come from inside, from recognition of what you are, and what you've done for us all. You've been a hero, and you've been kind as well as brave. Antoun Effendi, I think you are a very great gentleman, and I respect Egyptians for your sake. Wait, said Anthony. You haven't heard my confession. When I first saw you on the terrace at Shepherd's, I willed you to look at me, and you did look. How strange. Yes, I felt it. Something made me look. Why did you will me, Antoun Effendi? Monty's voice was soft, but it was not like a child's now. It was a woman's voice. Listening with tingling ears, I knew what she wanted him to answer. Perhaps he also knew, but he boldly told the truth. It was a kind of wager I made with myself. There was some troublesome business I had to carry out in Cairo. A good deal hung upon it. I saw your profile. You didn't turn my way, and I said to myself, if by willing I can make that girl look at me, I'll take it for a sign that I should succeed in my work. Oh, it was nothing to do with me? Not then. Afterward I knew that, while I thought my own free will suggested my influencing you, it was destiny that influenced me. Kismet! It had to happen so. But you punished me for my presumption. You treated me as if I were a slave, a thing that hardly had a place in your world. I know. That's what I've asked you to forgive me for. And because you've asked me to forgive, I'm telling you this. I was furious, and I said, she shall be sorry. I will make her sorry. My whole wish was to humble you. I wanted to conquer, and though you classed me with servants, to be your master. I don't blame you, Antoun Effendi, and you have conquered in a better way than you meant when you were angry and hating me. You've conquered by showing your true self. You are my friend. That's what you want, isn't it? Not to be my master when you don't hate me any longer? No, that is not what I want. I still want to be your master. Then you do hate me even now? No, I don't hate you, Mademoiselle Gilder, although you've punished me over and over again for being the brute I was at first. You have conquered me, not I you. But I don't want to be your friend. If you didn't look at me as being a man beyond the pale, you would understand very well what I want. Don't say that, cried Monty quickly. Don't say that you're a man beyond the pale. I can't stand it. Oh, I do know what you want. I do understand it. I think I should have died if you hadn't wanted it. And yet I could almost die because you do. You could die because I love you? Yes, of joy, and— You care for me? Wait, I could die of joy and sorrow too. Joy because I do care, and my heart longs for you to care. Sorrow because— Oh, it's the saddest thing in the world, but we can never be any more to each other than we are now. You say that so firmly because you think of me in your heart as a man of Egypt. Dearest and most beautiful, you are great enough if you choose to mount to your happiness over your prejudice. If you can love me in spite of what I am, I love you in spite of it, and because of it too, and for every reason, and for no reason. Thank God for that. You've said this to me against your convictions. I have won. No, for it's all I can ever say. There can be no more between us. You couldn't love me enough to be my wife, though I tell you now that you're the star of my soul? Never till I saw you have I loved a woman or spoken a word of love to one, except my beautiful mother. I've kept all for you, more than I dreamed I had to give, and it's yours forever and ever. But just because you've said to yourself that we're of stranger races, who mustn't meet in love, you raise a barrier between us. Are our souls of stranger races? No. Sometimes it almost seems as if our souls were one. You have waked mine with a spark from your own. I think I was fast asleep. I didn't know I had a soul, scarcely even a heart. But now I know. Learning to know you has taught me to know myself. And if I'm kinder to everybody all the rest of my life, even silly rich people I used to think didn't need kindness, it will be through loving you. I'm not afraid to tell you that, and though I used to be afraid I might love you, I'm glad I do now. Glad! I shall never regret anything, even when I suffer, and I shall suffer when we're parted. You're sure we must part? Sure, because there's no other way, being what we are, and life being what it is. Always I've thought, since my father died, that he was near me, watching to see what I did with my life. For he loved me dearly, and I loved him. We were everything to each other. Even if that were the only reason, I couldn't do a thing that would have broken his heart. It would be treacherous, now that he's hopeless, to forbid me. Don't you see? I see. And if it were not for that reason? If it were not for that, oh, I don't know. But yes, I do know. The truth comes to me. It speaks out of my heart. If it were only for myself, if I felt free from a vow, nothing could make me say to you, go out of my life. That's what I wanted to be sure of. I could thank you on my knees for those words. For I, too, have made a vow which I won't break. And if I were free of it, I might tell you a thing now which would beat down the barrier. Well, we will keep our vows, both of us, my queen. Yes, we must keep them. But oh, how are we to bear it? Fate has brought us together, and it's going to part us. We love each other, and we must go out of one another's lives. What shall we do when we can't see each other any more? Ever any more? That time shall not come. But it must, soon. Will you trust me till Khartoum? I'll trust you always. I mean for a special thing, just till Khartoum. In the foolish days when I wished to conquer you, and make you humble yourself to me, I vowed by my mother's love that I'd not tell you, or let Borrow tell, a fact about myself which might win your favour. It was a bad vow to make, a stupid vow, but a vow by my mother's love I could not break, any more than you can break one to your father's memory. I'll abide by it, but trust me till Khartoum, and there you shall know what I can't tell you now. I always hoped you would find out there, if we went as far as Khartoum together. Then I hoped, because I was a conceited fool. Now I hope this thing, and all it means, because I am your lover. Ah, dear Antoun, don't hope, because it seems to me that nothing nearer than heaven can bring us the kind of happiness you want. If you hadn't told me you cared, nothing that may come at Khartoum could have brought us any happiness to me at all, for it would have been too late for that, for you to say you cared, and for the word to have the value it has now. You've said it in spite of yourself. Trust me for the rest. Will you? If you ask me like that, yes, I trust you, though I don't understand. That's what I want. Say this. I believe that we shall be happy, and trust without understanding that it will be proved at Khartoum. Monty repeated the words after him. And although I was that vile worm, an eavesdropper, I was so happy that I could have picked Biddy up in my arms and waved her like a flag. Anthony was going to be happy, and that ought to be a good omen that I should be happy too. I am almost happy now, Monty went on, happier than I thought I could be, with things as they are. I used to be miserable, partly about myself, partly because I thought you were in love with Biddy. You were so much nicer to her than me, and partly because I believed, till I knew you well, that you wanted to marry Aunt Clara for money, though you cared for someone else. I even told Lord Ernest that about you. I had to tell somebody. And besides, I felt it would be good for him to think you cared for Biddy. Being jealous might wake him up to see that he was in love with her himself. He really is rather a duffer at times. And oh, talking of him and Biddy reminds me of them. Where can they be all this time?" "Heaven alone knows or cares," replied Anthony, and I realized the truth of the proverb about listeners, even where their best friends are concerned. I was obliged to kiss Biddy to keep from laughing out loud, and she couldn't scream or box my ears, or all our dreadful precautions would have been vain. "We must find them," said Monty. "Why?" "Oh, if we don't, they might find us." Anthony laughed, a giveaway, English-sounding laugh, but Monty did not recognize its birthplace. Her own laugh interrupted it too soon, ringing out so happily it probably surprised herself. "If they find us here," quavered Biddy, clinging to me. "They can't, if you'd only let me hold you tight enough," I whispered. "If they look in, they'll just take us for a black spot in the dark." But they didn't look in. They went downstairs, and then there was the time to get in the rest of my deadly work with Biddy. We must wait a few minutes, or they couldn't help knowing we'd been near them, and I made the best use of those few minutes. Biddy wouldn't promise anything, but said she would think it over and let me know the result of her thinking in a day or two. To our great surprise, on arriving in open air at the level of the roof below, we saw that the sun was gone, and a slim young moon was sliding down the rose-red trail. It is indeed wonderful, say prophets of the obvious, how quickly time passes when your attention is engaged. And one comfort of being obvious is that you are generally right. We tried to flit forth from the dark recesses of the pylon stairway without being seen or heard, but as luck would have it, Monty and Fenton had had just time to discover that our boat was gone. The girl was hunting for us to see if we were anywhere, or if in some mad freak we could have gone off and left them to their fate. As we sneaked guiltily out, she caught us. "Biddy! Lord Ernest!" she exclaimed. Why, you've been upstairs!" A good rule for diplomats, duffers, and others is never to tell a falsehood when there is no hope that anyone will believe it. Yes," we both mumbled. "But there isn't any upstairs except where we were." "Yes, there is," Biddy assured her hastily, too hastily. "You were on the roof. We were in the little room of the guardian." He showed it to us. "There's a window." "Oh, we were under it. You must both have heard." "Murder will out," I said, with the calmness of despair. But then it occurred to me that there was a way of using the weapon which threatened as a boomerang. "Dearest," Biddy adjured her beloved, humbly, "you wouldn't have had us spoil everything by moving, would you? I said to the duffer, when he wanted to do something desperate, 'If we interrupt them, nothing will ever come right.' Besides, we were too busy getting engaged ourselves," said I, "to bother for long about what anybody else was saying or doing." "You were? Oh, Biddy, that's what I've prayed for." "Nothing of the sort," began Mrs. O'Brien, ferociously, but the boomerang had come to my hand, and I'd caught it on the fly. Before she could go on contradicting me, Anthony, followed by the guardian of the temple, had mounted the steps from the lower ledge of the roof, where we had landed in the afternoon. "It wasn't you who took the boat, then, for a joke," said Fenton at sight of us, and the mystery of our felucca's disappearance had to be discussed. Biddy saw to it that Monty couldn't edge a word in on the forbidden subject. How those two would talk later in Miss Gilder's stateroom! Nobody could explain what had happened, not even the guardian. He, it seemed, spent his night at the Siren Temple in the water, sleeping in the cell where I had blackmailed Biddy, and not even appearing to know that the custom scintillated with romance. By and by his companion who joined him for night work would arrive in a small boat, bringing food, but this man rowed himself, and neither could leave the temple again that night. "You will lend the boat to us," said Anthony. "We'll row, and send it back to you by someone who is trustworthy." "We have no right to lend the boat," returned the Nubian. "Then I will steal it," replied the Hadji. But none of us cared how long a time might pass before deliverance came. The Enchantress Isis couldn't steam away and leave her conductor behind. As Mrs. East had disappeared, I vaguely associated the puzzle of our missing craft with Sir Marcus, and anyhow curiosity wasn't the strongest emotion in my being just then. I thought that perhaps never in my life again would love and romance and beauty all blend together into one, as here at Philae in the moonlight. The sharp sickle of the young moon cut a silver edge on each tiny wave, that murmured against the submerged pillars like a chanting of priests under the sea. The temple commemorating love triumphant was carved in silver, and drowned in a silver flood. The flowering capitals of the columns, as they showed above the water, blossomed white as lilies bound together in sheaves with silver cords, and placed before an altar. Yes, Egypt was giving us what we asked. But would she give us all we asked? Just as there might have been a renewed chance of getting an answer to this question, black men in a black boat hailed us. Sir Marcus had deigned at last to remember our plight. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 27. The Inner Sanctuary. We made a sensation when we returned to the fold. Everybody wondered so much that they gave us no time to answer their questions, even if we would. But somehow it seemed to be taken for granted that the whole thing was my fault. Perhaps Mrs. East or Sir Marcus had spread the report. I let it pass. As for Sir Marcus, he stayed only long enough for a talk with me. It began with a trumped-up business, and ended in a confession. She had snubbed him, it seemed. Snubs being new to Sir Marcus, he had been dazed, and had forgotten, for a while, to send us a boat. I assured him that we bore no grudge, really, none whatever. It had been an adventure. But I tried to cheer him up. Better luck next time. Why wouldn't he go on with us? Fenton and I could chum together, to give him cabin room. And Neil Sheridan, the American Egyptologist, had let me know that he was obliged to leave us at Wadi Halfa. There would be an empty cabin, going down again. But no, the boss refused his conductor's hospitality. I think the less she sees of me, the better she likes me, he said, dismally. She was civil enough until but no matter. I suppose a man can't expect his luck to always hold. Don't split your infinitives till things get desperate, I begged. It hasn't come to that yet. If you must go back, I'll take it on my shoulders to watch your private interests a bit, as well as the rest. Look out for a telegram one of these fine days, saying, "Come at once." You'll know what it means. I will, bless you, my boy, he said heartily, though I am hanged if I know what you mean by a split infinitive. I hope, if it's improper, I've never inadvertently done it before a lady. There seemed to be an atmosphere of suspense for everybody who mattered, as we steamed on between strange black mountainettes and tiger golden sands toward Wadi Halfa. Anthony was in suspense about the way his fate might arrange itself at Khartoum. I was in suspense as to Biddy's decision, which nothing I was able to say could wheedle or browbeat out of her. He and I were both in suspense together about the mountain of the Golden Pyramid. It would be ours now, we knew that. But what would be in it? Would it be full of treasure, or full of nothing but mountain, just as a crusty baked pudding is full of pudding? The doubt was harder to bear, now that Anthony was in love with a very rich girl, and desired something from the mountain more substantial than the adventure which would once have contented him. Harder to bear for me, too, wanting Biddy, and wanting to give her luxury as well as peace, such as she had never known in her life of tragedy and brave laughter. Monty was in suspense quite equal to Anthony's about Khartoum, and what could possibly happen there to give her happiness. Bridget was in suspense about the two men who had so strangely and secretly worked together with their spy, Better, and whom she expected to meet again later. Rachel was in suspense about Bailey, although I had told her it was going to be all right, and he had said not a word of the business to her. What she wanted was to make sure of him, and there was the difficulty at present, since we had failed to arrange for a registry office or a clergyman on board. Other hearts were no doubt throbbing with the same emotions, but they were of comparatively small importance to me. Our feelings were all so different and so much more intense than they had been, that the extraordinary difference in the scenery gave us a vague sense of satisfaction. We were in another world, now that we had heard the first cataract's roar and left it behind, a world utterly unlike any conceptions we had formed of Egypt. But we did not, for a long time, leave the influence of the barrage. Black rocks ringed in a blue basin so lake-like that it was hard to realize it as the Nile. Now and then a yellow river of sand poured down to the sapphire sea, and where its bright waves were reflected, the water became liquid gold under a surface of blue glass. The sky was overcast, and, through a thick silver veil, the sun shone with a mystic light, as of a lamp burning in an alabaster globe, yet the flaming gold of the sand created an illusion of sunshine. It was as if the treasure of all lost mines of Nub had been flung out on the black rocks, and lay in a glittering carpet there. We passed small, submerged temples, with their foreheads just above water, drowning palm groves whose plumes trailed sadly on the blue expanse, and deserted mud villages where the high Nile looked in at open doors to say, "This is for Egypt's good." Then there was the little temple of Dendur, whose patron goddess was prayed to spit if rain were needed, and so many other ruined temples that we lost count, though one was the largest in Nubia, until we came to Wadi es Sabua, the Valley of the Lions. This we remembered, not because it was imposing, or because it had a dromos of noble-faced sphinxes, the only hawk-faced ones in Egypt, or because of its prehistoric writings on dark boulders, or because it had been used as a Christian church, but owing to the fact that the ladies bought rag dolls from little Nubian girls, who wore their hair in a million greased braids. Here the influence of the dam faded out of sight. Forlorn trees and houses no longer crawled half out of water. Mountains crowded down to the shore, wild and dark and stately as Nubian warriors of ancient days. Then came Korosko, point of departure for the old caravan route, where kings of forgotten Egyptian dynasties sent for acacia wood, and Englishmen in the campaign of the Cataracts fought and died, deserted now, with houses dead and decayed, their windows staring like the eye sockets of skulls, and the black, tortured mountain shapes behind, lurking in the background as hyenas lurk to prey. More temples, and many sakias, no shadoofs here on the upper Nile, but few boats. The spacious times were past when loads of pink granite, honey-coloured sandstone, fragrant woods, and spices from the land of Punt went floating down the stream. There were tombs as well as temples which we might have seen, savage gorges and mild green hills. There was the great grim fort of Kasr Ibrim, and at last there was Abu Simbel. Somehow I knew that things were bound to happen at Abu Simbel. I didn't know what they would be, but they hovered invisible at my berthside in the night, and whispered to warn me that I might expect them. A few people rose stealthily before dawn to prepare for Abu Simbel, because it had been hammered into their intellects by me that this rock temple was the great thing of the upper Nile. Also that every he, she, or it, who did not behold the place at sunrise, would be as mean a worm as one who had not read the Arabian Nights. Not everybody heeded the advice, though at bedtime most had resolved to do so. We had anchored for the night not far off, in order to have the mysterious light before sun-up, to go on again, and see the grand approach to the grandest temple of the old world. But after all, most of the cabin eyelids were still down when we arrived before dawn at our journey's end, and only a few intrepid ghosts flitted out on deck, elderly male ghosts in thick dressing-gowns, youthful ghosts of the same sex, fully clothed and decently groomed because cloaked girl ghosts with floating hair, if there were enough to float effectively, others made a virtue of having it put up, and middle-aged female ghosts with transformations apparently hindside and front. No ghost's looks mattered much, however, for good or ill, since the slowly moving Enchantress had swept aside a purple curtain of distance, and shown us such a stage setting as only nature's stupendous theatre can give. It was a stage still dimly, but most effectively revealed. Lights down, pale blue, lilac and cold green, a thrilling, almost sinister combination, no gold or rose switched on yet. Turned obliquely toward the river, facing slightly northward, 4 figures sat on thrones, super-giants, immobile, incredible against a background of rock, whence they had been released by forgotten sculptors, released to live while the world lasted. These seated kings gave the first shock of awed admiration, then lesser marvels detached themselves in detail from the shadows of the vast façade, the frieze, the cornice, the sun-god in his niche over the door of the great temple, the smaller temple of Hathor, divided from her huge brother by a cataract of sand, whose piled gold dust already called the sun as a magnet calls iron. The stage lights were still down when the Enchantress moored by the river bank, within a comparatively short walk of the mountain which Ramesses II had turned into a temple, as usual glorifying himself. But though the walk was comparatively short, on second thoughts elderly ghosts, chilled to the bone, funked it on empty stomachs. They made various excuses for putting off the excursion (the boat was to remain till late afternoon), until finally the sun worshippers were reduced to a party of 10. Since Philae, Biddy had kept out of my way when she could do so without being actually rude, but as our small, shivering procession formed, she suddenly appeared at my side. Thus we two headed the band, save for a sleepy dragoman who knew the rather intricate paths through scaly, dried mud, sand, and vegetation. "I want to say something to you, Duffer," she murmured, and the roughness of the way excused me for slipping her arm through mine. "Not as much as I want to say something to you," I retorted fervently. "But this is serious," she reproached me. Please listen, there isn't much time. I heard this only last night, or I'd have spoken before, and asked you what you thought. Do you happen to know whether Captain Fenton wrote a note to Monny, asking her to wait for him in the inner sanctuary of the temple, till after the people had gone, as he wanted to see her alone about something of great importance?" "I don't know," I said. "Anthony hasn't mentioned Miss Gilder's name to me since Philae. As a matter of fact, he's been particularly taciturn." "You haven't quarrelled, surely?" "Anthony and I? Thank goodness, no. But I'm afraid he misunderstands, and is a bit annoyed. Miss Gilder, of course, told him we'd overheard a certain conversation, and he's never given me a chance to explain. After Khartoum it will be all right, if not before, but meanwhile—" "I see. Then let me tell you quickly what's happened. When we came back on board the boat, after climbing about the fort of Kasr Ibrim, Monny found on the table in her cabin a note in French, typewritten on Enchantress Isis paper. It had no beginning or signature, only an urgent request to grant the writer 5 minutes just after sunrise, in the sanctuary at Abu Simbel, as soon as everyone was out of the way. There's only one typewriter on board, isn't there?" "Yes, Kruger's." "And nobody but you and he and Captain Fenton ever use it, I suppose?" "Nobody else, so far as I know. Captain Fenton didn't land with us to see the fort, but came up later, just as we were ready to go down. Well, for all these reasons and the note being in French, Monny thinks it was written by Antoun Effendi. It was only in chatting last night about the sunrise expedition that she mentioned finding the letter. I begged her to make certain it was from him before doing what it asked, because you see I'm still afraid of anything that seems queer or mysterious. But she laughed and said, 'What nonsense! Who else could have written it except Lord Ernest, unless you think Mr. Kruger's in a plot?' And she refused to question Antoun, because if he'd wanted the thing to be talked over he'd have spoken instead of writing. As for doing what he asked, she pretended not to have made up her mind. She said she'd see what mood she was in, after the others had finished with the sanctuary. Well, what I want is for you and me to stay in the place ourselves when the others have gone." "With the greatest of pleasure on earth," said I. "Don't be foolish. You aren't to torment me there." "That depends on what you call tormenting. If I'm to be made a spoil sport for Fenton and Miss Gilder, a kind of live scarecrow, I mean to get something out of it for myself." There was no time for more. We had arrived at the foot of the long flight of stone steps which lead up to the rocky plateau of the great temple. In the east, a golden fire below the horizon was sending up premonitory flames, and the procession must bestir itself or be too late. The whole object of arriving at this unearthly hour would be defeated, if, before the sun's forefinger touched the faces of the altar statues, we were not in the sanctuary. No time to study the features of the Colossi, or to search for the grave of Major Tidwell. These things must wait. The dark-faced guardian examined our tickets, and let us file through the rock-hewn doorway, whose iron grille he had just opened. As we passed into the cavernous hall of roughly carved Osiride columns, the huge figures attached to them loomed vaguely out of purple gloom. There was an impression of sculptured rock walls, with splashes of colour here and there, of columns in a chamber beyond, and still a third chamber, whence 3 rooms opened off, the side doorways mere blocks of ebony in the distance. But already the sun's first ray groped for its goal, like the wandering finger of a blind man. We had only time to hurry through the faintly lit middle doorway, and plaster ourselves round the rock walls of the sanctuary, when the golden digit touched the altar and found the 4 sculptured forms above, Harmarchis, Rameses, Amen, and Ptah. Night lingered in the temple, a black brooding vulture. But suddenly the bird's dark breast was struck by a golden bullet, and from the wound a magic radiance grew. The effect, carefully calculated by priests and builders thousands of years ago, was as thrilling today as on the morning when the sun first poured gold upon the altar. The sightless faces of the statues were given eyes of an unearthly brilliance to stare into ours and search our souls. But with most of the party, to be thrilled for a minute was enough. As the sun's finger began to move, they found it time to move also. There was the whole temple to be seen, and then the walk back to the boat before dressing for breakfast. Soon Biddy and I had, or seemed to have, the sanctuary to ourselves. Even the sun's rays had left us, mounting higher and passing above the doorway of the inner shrine. The momentarily disturbed shadows folded round us again, with only a faint glimmer on the wall over the altar to show that day was born. "Did you notice that Monny wasn't with the others?" asked Bridget in a low voice. "She lingered behind, I think, and never came near us. I wasn't sure till I watched the rest filing out of this room. Then I saw she wasn't among them. Neither was Captain Fenton." "If they're together, it's all right," I assured her. "Yes, but are they? That affair of the typewritten note has worried me." "You're very nervous, darling, but no wonder." "You mustn't call me darling." "Why not? It's no worse than Duffer. I like your calling me that." "I wonder if we ought to go, as she never came, or to stay and wait. If we go, we shall be playing into Miss Gilder's hands. If we stay, we shall be playing into mine. Which do you prefer?" "Oh, I suppose we'd better stay, for fear of something. But you must be good." Then abruptly I attacked her with a change of weapons. I had fenced lightly, knowing that Biddy liked a man who could laugh. But now I threw away my rapier and snatched a club. I told her I would stand no more of this. Did she want to spoil my life and break my heart? She was the one thing I needed. Now she would have to say whether she'd put me off because she didn't love me and never could, or because of that trash about not wanting to involve me in her troubles. No use prevaricating. I should know whether she lied or told the truth by the sound of her voice. But I might as well confess, before she began, that I'd rather be loved by her and refused, than not loved and refused. Women seem to think the unselfish thing was to pretend not to care if a man had to be sent away, because in the end that made it easier for him. But in real life, with a real man, it was the other way around. "I think you're right, Duffer," Biddy said softly. "That's why I wouldn't answer you for good and all, that night at Philae. I felt then it might be kinder to tell you I could never care. But I've thought of nothing else since, except a little about Monny, and I decided that if it were me, I'd rather be loved, whatever happened. Men can't be so very different where their hearts are concerned. So I'm going to tell you I do love you. It was hard to give you to Monny. But I thought it would be for your happiness. I nearly died of love for you when I was a little girl. I kept every tiniest thing you ever gave me. I was in love with your memory when you went up to Oxford. And it was then that Richard O'Brien came. He swept me off my feet, and made me think that my heart was caught in the rebound. When it was too late, I realized that it hadn't been caught at all, only hypnotized for a while. I've loved you always, Duffer dear. The thought of you is my one comfort, often, although I hardly expected to see you again, or maybe for that very reason. No, don't touch me. Please let me go on now, or I'll not tell you any more. I wonder if you never guessed what I had in that chamois skin bag you're so worried about. Why, I did guess, Biddy, right or wrong. And I bet you it was wrong. What did you think, when I wouldn't understand any of your hints to tell what I wore over my heart? I thought then, I answered after a moment's deliberation, that you kept compromising documents which might be of interest to the organization you and I have talked about. Now I think differently. I think you kept a lock of my childish hair, or my first tooth. You conceited, Duffer. Not so bad as that, because I never had a chance of getting either. Once I did keep in that bag just what you said, compromising documents that the organization would have given thousands of dollars to get. And my life wouldn't have stood in their way for a minute, I'm sure. But that was before Richard died. He was afraid. I thought it would be better and less suspicious if I had charge of the papers. And if the society had ever got hold of him, he believed the letters and list of names I had might have bought back his safety, if I played my hand well. He'd told me just what to do. But when he was ill he had a nurse whom I began to suspect as a spy. Once when I was called into Richard's room suddenly, half dressed, the chamois skin bag showed, as my wrapper fell open at the breast. I caught her looking at it with an eager look, and that very night I had it locked up in a bank. It was only a few days later that Richard died, and with him gone, I felt that there was no more need to keep papers which might cost the lives or liberty of men. Richard had wronged his friends, and I wanted none of them to come to harm through me, though they'd made me suffer with him. I burned every scrap of paper I had, every single one. And it wasn't till there was an attempt to kidnap Esme that I asked myself if I'd been right. Still, even now, I am not sorry. I wouldn't hurt a hair of their heads. For a while the bag was empty, but coming away from America and feeling a bit lonesome, I thought it would do me good to look now and then at the only love letter you ever wrote me. It was on my 9th birthday, but I don't believe you could write a better one now. There was a photograph, too, of my lord when he was 17. I stole that, but it was all the dearer. At this very minute the letter and the picture are lying on my heart. So now you know whether I care for you or not, and you can understand why I wouldn't put the bag into a bank. "Oh, Biddy, darling," I said, "you've made me the happiest man in the world." "Well, I'm glad," she snapped, twisting away from me, "that it takes so little to make you happy." "So little, when I'm going to have you for my wife?" "But you're not. You said you'd rather be loved and refused." "I would if I had to choose between the two. That's not the case with me, for I shall marry you now I know the truth, in spite of 50 or 50,000 refusals, or any other little obstacles like that." "Never, Duffer. Not for all the world would I be your wife, loving you as I do, unless the organization would forget or forgive Esme and me. And that I can't fancy they'll ever do, till the millennium. I shall be past the marrying age then. Oh, Duffer, I almost wish you had fallen in love with Monty, as I wanted you to do." "Honest Injun, you really wanted that to happen?" "Well, I tried to want it for your sake, and in a way for my own, too. If I'd seen you caring for Monty, I should have found some medicine to cure my heartache. Oh, it would have been a very good thing all around, except for your friend, Anthony Fenton. And I was half afraid he was in love with you. I can tell you I've had my trials, Biddy. It's my turn to be happy now, and yours too. Just think, nearly everybody in the world is engaged, but us, or next door to being engaged. Miss Gilder and Anthony, who's the only man on earth to keep her in order, and Rachel Guest and Bailey, and Enid Biddle and Harry Snell, and even your stepdaughter, Esme O'Brien. Duffer, she's married." "What, to young Halloran? How did they manage it?" "I don't know yet. I've had only a telegram. It came to Aswan too late, and Sir Marcus Lark brought it to the boat. I found it that night when we got back from Philae. But I haven't told, because I dared not be with you alone long enough to speak of private affairs, till I could decide whether to let you know I loved you, or make believe I didn't care a scrap. As if I could have believed your tongue, unless you had shut your eyes. So Esme is married, and off your hands?" "Not off my hands, I'm afraid. This may be visited on me. They must have known of her meeting Tom Halloran at St. Martin Vestibule last summer. They find out everything, sooner or later. Probably they thought I'd whisked her off to Egypt with me, helped by my young friend Miss Gilder, for whom they took Rachel Guest, in order to let her meet Tom Halloran again, and marry him secretly. Well, she has married him secretly. When they discover what's happened, they're sure to put the blame on poor me. And indeed it is a shocking thing for the son of that man in prison, and the daughter of the man who sent him there, to be husband and wife." "I don't see that at all," I argued. "Why shouldn't their love end the feud?" "It can't, for strong as it may be, it won't release prisoners, or bring back to life those who are dead." "Anyhow, don't borrow trouble," said I. "If Esme's married, the more reason for us to follow her example. After Khartoum, when Miss Gilder—" "Who's taking my name in vain?" inquired the owner of it, at the sanctuary door. "Oh, then you have come, Monty!" Brigit exclaimed. "I'd given you up." "I haven't come for the reason you thought," returned the girl promptly. "I was sure you meant to head me off, and I've learned without asking that Antoun Effendi didn't write that note." "Who told you so? Who did?" "He's trying to find out. Probably it was a silly practical joke some one wanted to play on me. There are lots quite capable of it on board. Antoun Effendi said the sunrise was much finer really, from on top of the great sandhill, so we climbed up. And it came out that he hadn't asked me to meet him here. If anyone not on the boat wrote the letter, some steward must have been bribed to sell a bit of writing paper, and allow a stranger to come on board, while we were away at Kasr Ibrim. There was a steam dahabeah moored not far off, if you remember, with oriental decorations, so we fancied it must belong to an Egyptian or a Turk. "It could easily have been hired at Assuan," Biddy exclaimed, "and it could have beaten us. We've stopped at such heaps of temples where other boats only touch coming back." "If there were a plot, as you were always imagining, the dahabeah would have to be near here too," Monny laughed incredulously. "And so it may be. We haven't seen round the corner of the great temple yet. One would think, to hear you talk, that you'd expected this poor little sanctuary to be stuffed with murderers, or, at the least, kidnappers." "Ugh, don't speak of it!" Biddy shuddered. "Let's go out into the sunlight again, as quick as ever we can." End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 28. Worth Paying For. When Anthony says that he will find things out, he seldom fails. Perhaps nobody but a green-turbaned Hadji could so speedily have screwed information out of secretive Arabs, paid to be silent. And he had to fit deductions into spaces of the puzzle left empty by fibs and glib self-excusings. What he did learn was this: a dragoman had come, in a small boat, from a steam dahabeah to the Enchantress Isis while we were away at Kasr Ibrim. He presented credentials written out for him in Cairo by Miss Rachel Guest, and dated a few weeks ago. Inquiring for her, he seemed sorry to hear that she had gone on the excursion. The dragoman refused to disturb Antoun Effendi on hearing that the Hadji was riding in his cabin. His errand was not of enough importance to trouble so illustrious a man. All he wanted was permission to type 1 or 2 letters for his employers on the neighbouring dahabeah, which possessed no machine. In the absence of Mr. Kruger, who had gone on shore for exercise, the dragoman was given this privilege. Possibly he had taken some of the boat's letter paper. Who could be certain of these trifles? Possibly, also, he had walked about with one of the cabin stewards to see the luxury appointments of the Enchantress Isis. As for paying money for these small favours, who could tell? And nobody knew if the steam dahabeah had hurried on before us, to anchor out of sight round the oblique façade of Abu Simbel. In any case, when we went to look for the suspicious craft seen near Kasr Ibrim, she was not among the 2 or 3 small private dahabeahs of artists and others moored within a mile of the great temple. Notwithstanding her absence, however, Anthony and I, suddenly confidential friends again, thought it likely that the shadows in the sanctuary had not been its only tenants when we entered there. The invaluable Bedr knew enough of the Nile temples to know that the sun's first light strikes only the altar and the statues over it, in Abu Simbel's inner shrine, that the 4 corners of the small cavern room remain pitch black, unless the place is artificially illuminated, and that this is never done at sunrise. The dragoman and 1 or both of his employers would have had no difficulty in getting into the temple before the first streak of dawn, if they had warned its guardian the night before. So far, our deductions were simple, after learning how the trick of the typewritten note had been managed, but it was not so easy to guess the object of the plot. Was Monny Gilder to have been murdered in the dark sanctuary, or was she to have been kidnapped? Either seemed an impossible undertaking, unless the plotters were willing to face certain detection and arrest. As it was, we had no more tangible proof against the man than we had before at the House of the Crocodile, in the desert near Medinet, at Asiut, and at Luxor. With a sly cleverness which did Bedr, or those employing him, much credit, they had screened themselves behind others. Even if we had the names of the tourists Bedr had served as dragoman, and if we could lay our hands on their shoulders, we had not enough evidence of what they had done to obtain a warrant of arrest, and this, of course, they knew. Our best chance, Anthony thought, lay in springing a surprise on them, as they had vainly, so far, tried to do with us, and when we got them somehow at our mercy, force out the truth. It was almost certain that a steam dahabeah could not unseen have passed the Enchantress Isis at Abu Simbel in broad daylight, going back toward Assuan. Therefore, since it was not moored near the temple, if it had been in the neighbourhood at all, it must have dashed on ahead of us in the direction of Wadi Halfa. With pleasure would we have given immediate chase, had not the Enchantress been pledged to remain at Abu Simbel till afternoon. Even as it was, I expected to catch up with a boat so much smaller than our own, but Anthony damped my hopes, explaining the difficulties of navigation between Abu Simbel and Wadi Halfa. There were, he said, great shifting sand banks in the water, which looked so transparently green, so treacherously clear. Without the most prudent piloting, the river was actually dangerous, as new sandbanks had a habit of forming the minute you shut your eyes or turned your back. The Enchantress would have to pick her way slowly through the silver sands of the Nile, which mingled with the spilt gold dust of the desert shore. All the same, these impudent rascals would find it hard to hide from us at Wadi Halfa, especially if we stopped the boat and wired from the next telegraph station to have them watched on the arrival of their dahabeah. Perhaps, as they're so clever, they'll be clever enough not to arrive at all, was my suggestion, and Anthony could only shrug his shoulders. Wait and see had to be our policy. Happily, the set wandered in and out of the two temples, big and little, all the morning, ignorant of our worries, which even to us seemed small under the benign gaze of the great colossi. The 3 stone Rameses who had faces wore expressions no one could ever forget, and there was a sense of loss in turning away from them. A crocodile swam past the Enchantress as she steamed up river, a long, dark, prehistoric shape. He seemed an anachronism, but so did Bedr, with his plottings, yet both were real as this Nile dream of dark rocks, of conical black mountains shaped like ruined pyramids, and yellow sand hills, whose dazzling reflections turned the blue-green river to gold. The next day at noon we came to Wadi Halfa, and the Enchantress Isis, who had brought us 800 miles from Cairo, was now to be deserted by those with Khartoum in view. All save 3 of the party were going on through this gate of the Sudan, where the river way ended and the desert way began. Neil Sheridan was turning back immediately in a government steamer, and a bride and a groom who cared not where they were, if with each other, would wait on board the Enchantress until the band of passengers should return from Khartoum. These things had to be thought of. But I meant to let Kruger do most of the thinking when we landed at the neat, colourful town of Halfa, which lies, as Aswan lies, all pink and blue and green along the river bank, sentinelled with trees. From a distance Anthony and I caught sight of the steam dahabeah seen near Kasr Ibrim, and we could hardly wait to get on shore. The camp was but a mile and a half away, and I had wired in Lark's name to an officer whom he was sure to know, asking as great a favour to have the passengers on board a boat of that description watched, and requesting him, if possible, to meet the Enchantress on her arrival. "There he is," said Fenton, standing at the rail. "I mustn't seem to recognise him, of course. Can't give myself away. But you good Lord, there's Bedr," I broke in, hardly believing my eyes. And there Bedr was, looking as if butter would by no means melt in his mouth. Bedr, smiling from the pier, evidently there for the special purpose of meeting us. His ugly, squat figure, and the tall, khaki-clad form of the officer, were conspicuous among squatting blacks, male and female, in gay turbans, veils and mantles, muffled babies in arms, and children dressed in exceedingly brief fringes. "I'll attend to him while you powwow with Ireton," said Anthony, ready for the unexpected situation; and while the indispensable if humble Kruger showed the passengers how to get to the desert train, superintending the landing of the luggage, and made himself perspiringly useful, I thanked Major Ireton in Sir Marcus Lark's and my own name. His news was astonishing. There were no passengers on board the steam dahabeah Mahmoudieh. She had arrived with none save her crew, and the dragoman now talking with that good-looking Hadji there. As I murmured "yes" and "no" and "indeed," "really," to the officer who had kindly worked on our behalf, I was saying to myself, "My dear Duffer, what an ass you were not to think of that!" For of course the men had remained at Abu Simbel, hiding till we should be out of the way, and sending their boat on to put us off the track. A Cook steamer and a Hamburg American boat were due to stop at the temple. We had passed both on the river. By this time the 2 men were doubtless on their way north, making for Cairo and safety. Still, here was Bedr, looking like a fat fly who had deliberately come to pay a call on the lean and hungry spider. I was impatient for the moment when the need for genuine gratitude and faked explanation was over, and Major Ireton had gone about other business. Then I could follow the Hadji and the Armenian, who had mounted the steps leading up from the river level to the town. Not far off I could see the blue-windowed, white-painted desert train, round which, on the station platform, buzzed and scolded the set, demanding their hand luggage and their compartments. But Anthony and his victim, or was it by chance vice versa, were keeping out of eyeshot and earshot of the late passengers of the Enchantress. Bridget and Monty, who must have seen better, were too tactful to hover near. Also they knew Antoun Effendi too well to think it necessary. Bedr gave me no time to speak. He rushed forward to greet me with effusion, as if I were a long-lost and well-loved patron. "I've been so glad to see you after these days, milord. Sure," he began. "Antoun Effendi he tell you I come here on purpose to do you good. I find out those gentlemen's very wicked men, so I leave them quick. They want to pay me for go back with them, but no money big enough now I know they try to do harm to my nice young lady. She wasn't so good to me as the other nice young lady, but that makes no matter. I not stand for any hurt to her, sure I will not, milord." The meaning of this rigmarole, Anthony cut him short, speaking in German, which he knew I understood, and trusted Bedr didn't, is, that the fellow wants us to buy information from him. He pretends to have broken with his employers on our account, though his explanation of getting here to Halfa on their dahabeah is ridiculous, and that, having come for our benefit against their wishes, he's without pay, penniless, and stranded. A lie, of course, I took for granted, also in German. The part about being broke, certainly, but it's certain, too, that he must know some things we'd like to know. Could we trust a word he says? No, as far as his moral sense is concerned, but my idea is to bargain with him. We to pay according to value received. That might be bait for a fish worth hooking. Yes, that's our line. We haven't much time to hear and digest his story, though. The train will start in less than an hour. We shan't waste a minute. Without waiting for you, I began to bargain on the line I've just suggested. How far did you get? A good way, for I was able to scare him a bit. You see, he earns his living in Cairo, and I've persuaded him that I have some influence there, in quarters that can make or break him. He hasn't much more time to spare than we have, if it's true he wants to start back on the government boat. You know they take natives third class. My suggestion, subject to your approval, is this. In any case we give 1,000 piastres, £10. But if what he can tell us is of real use or even interest, we rise to the extent of 10 times that sum. It's a good deal for a beastly baboon like him. Remember, he has been doing services lately for which he probably got high pay. All right, whatever you say goes, I agreed. I trust to your honours, my gentlemans, remarked the beastly baboon in question, in a manner so apropos that I guessed him not entirely ignorant of German, after all. Thanks for the compliment, I responded gratefully. We shall have to talk here. There's no time to find a more convenient place, said Fenton, returning to Arabic as a medium of communication. Fire away, Bedr, but don't start your story in the middle. Begin where you took service with those Irish-American gentlemen. Was the gentleman's Irish? I never know that, purred the guileless Bedr, but Fenton brought him to his bearings. All questions were to be from us to him. So Bedr fired away, and there, within a stone's throw of the train getting up steam for Khartoum, we listened to a strange tale, as strange and as great an anachronism as that dark crocodile shape we had seen, except in the Nile country, where live crocodiles and many other dark things can easily happen any day. Blount's name, according to Bedr, was not Blount, but something else well known in America. It was a name already associated with that of O'Brien, which inclined us to hope for some grains of truth in the chaff of lies we expected. Bedr said that in New York, years ago, he had known the man Blount. He was related to the American family who took Bedr from Cairo. Later, when the Armenians had returned to Egypt, Blount had come with them for a rest cure. He had engaged Bedr as dragoman, and, on leaving, had asked for Bedr's card. That was years ago, and nothing had been heard from him since. But before the Laconia was due to arrive, Bedr had received a telegram from Blount instructing him to meet the ship, and wire to Paris whether Miss Gilder of New York and a Mrs. Jones were on board with a party. Blount knew that Bedr had seen Miss Gilder as a child, and might now be able to recognize her. On the day in New York when a block in traffic had given a glimpse of the little girl in a motor car with her father, Bedr and Blount had been together. As soon as possible after Bedr's reply, Blount and another man, who called himself Hanna, had arrived in Cairo. Bedr knew that they had a fixed theory in regard to the young lady who passed as Miss Gilder. Who they supposed her to be he could not tell, but once he had happened to be near when they were not aware of his presence, and had heard one of them mention a woman's name, which sounded like Esne. They accepted his word that he had been able to identify the so-called Miss Guest as Rosamond Gilder, and in her they appeared to take no further interest. Their attention was concentrated on Mrs. Jones and the lady who, according to their belief, was but posing as Miss Gilder. Apparently they imagined her to be quite another person, one whom they had taken a great deal of trouble to reach. Also they had an idea that Mrs. Jones possessed something of which they were anxious to get hold. It was a something which ought to be theirs, and they had been after it for years, but she had contrived to hide herself and it until lately. Why he had been told to guide the two younger ladies to the House of Crocodiles, Bedr pretended not to know. Perhaps, only perhaps, Blount and his companion, Hanna, wished to kidnap the one we call Miss Gilder, and they called Esne. But good, kind Bedr had never dreamed that they meant any real harm. There had been a plan of some sort for that night. Blount and Hanna were to arrive at the House of the Crocodile for a close look at the young ladies, when the latter had gone to sleep under the influence of the hashish they intended to smoke. But the two gentlemen had not kept the appointment. At first Bedr had not understood why, and had not known what to do. And afterward, of course, when he had heard of the row in the street, which had caused the closing of the house for many tedious hours, he had guessed. And later, when he learned that poor Mr. Blount lay wounded in a hospital, it had all become clear. Mr. Hanna, who seemed to work under Mr. Blount's orders, had not been able to act alone. Then, as to all the travelling up the Nile, Bedr had never been told why his gentlemen made the journey. Every one who came to Egypt went up the Nile, only he had been instructed to find out always where we were, and to arrange their arrival at about the same time. At Medinet they had not camped, or gone to a hotel, but had stayed in the house of a friend of Bedr's. It was convenient, though not as comfortable as he could wish for his clients. The advantage was, that from the roof it was possible to see into our camp. Bedr had made friends with one of the camel boys who went to the market to buy the black lamb, and while we were away had found out which was the tent where Mrs. Jones and Miss Gilder, or Esne, slept. What happened in the night he could not say. He had stayed at his friend's house, while the two gentlemen went out. He had done nothing at all for them in Medinet, except to discover the ladies' tent, and also to buy a bottle of olive oil. When the gentlemen came home in the middle of the night, they were angry with him, because they said he had shown them the wrong tent. But that was unjust. It was the only time they had been unkind. Except for that, they had been good, and had given him plenty of money for a while. At Assuat and Luxor, they had been pleased with him. All they wanted at Rashid Bey's house was to get the thing Mrs. Jones had, which ought to be theirs. They had not told him this, but he heard them talk sometimes. He knew more languages than they thought. If they wanted to steal the young lady, they had never said so. When the plan failed, they did not blame Bedr. It was not his fault. They saw that. The Mahmudieh had been engaged as long ago as just after Medinet, when the thing the gentlemen wanted to do there could not be done. But Bedr thought that, if the Luxor plan had been a success, the steam dahabeah would have gone north from there instead of south. It was because of that failure the boat had followed us up the Nile. At Abu Simbel Bedr had quarrelled with the gentlemen, because he had began to suspect that they meant to harm the ladies, or to one of them. He had been clever, and got on board the Enchantress as they told him to do. He had obtained writing paper, and typed a copy of a letter. In America he had learned to do typing. Often he could make better money in an engagement now, because he knew how to use a machine. And when the steward showed him over the boat, he left the letter in the stateroom which the Arab boy said was Miss Gilder's. In spite of all these good services, which no other dragoman in Egypt could have given, those gentlemen would not listen to a word of advice. Bedr heard them speak with the guardian of the temple about going in before anyone else came to see the sunrise. And afterward they talked of hiding in the sanctuary. First, they had asked him if it were always dark there, as the guide-book said. After hearing this he had put two and two together, and when he remembered what was in the note he typed for Miss Gilder, Bedr feared for her and Mrs. Jones. He begged the gentlemen not to do anything rash, and they were so angry at his interference that they sent him off with no more pay, nothing at all since Luxor. Oh no, they were not afraid of him, and what he could tell, because they said nobody would believe a dragoman's word against rich white gentlemen. People would say he lied for spite. But Bedr thought maybe we should believe, because we knew already that something strange had been going on. The gentlemen paid off the men on the Mahmoudieh and ordered her to go on to Wadi Halfa. They did not know that Bedr had slipped on board, and hidden there, on purpose to find us, and tell his story. A part of this tale carried truth on its face. But Anthony and I agreed that there was a queer discrepancy at the end. If Bedr spoke the truth, Blount and his comrade must have had a reason for wishing to get rid of the fellow, or for not caring what become of him, a reason unconnected with a quarrel. And it was certain that, if there had been a quarrel, it was not because of virtuous, plain speaking from Bedr. It seemed impossible that he could have got on board their hired boat to follow us, without his employer's knowledge. Was his appearance at Wadi Halfa, and his apparent betrayal of his clients, all a part of their plan? We could not decide this question in our minds, or by cross-questioning Bedr while the train waited, for only time could prove. But what we had heard was interesting enough to be worth the promised 1,000 piastres, and the fare north on the government boat just starting. To make sure that Bedr did start, we called Kruger, put the whole sum into his hands, asking him to help the dragoman by buying his ticket and getting the notes changed into gold and silver. This little manoeuvre left the Armenian so calm, however, that we fancied his wish must really be to depart on the government boat. Such inquiries as we had had time to make concerning the Mahmoudieh seemed to show that she must remain at Halfa for slight repairs to her engine, and instructions from her owner, who was staying at Aswan. It was just at this last minute of grace, with the station master adjuring, and the set reproaching us, that Anthony and I jumped on board the train. Strange that 2 rows of blue glass windows should have the power to turn the whole world topsy-turvy, or to create a new one, of entirely original colour scheme. But so it was. Those people seated in their grand, travelling bed-sitting rooms had only a superficial resemblance to the passengers of the Enchantress Isis. Monty, for instance, had pale green hair, with immense purple eyes, and showed every sign of rapid transformation into a mermaid. Cleopatra's auburn waves had turned to a vivid magenta, Biddy's black tresses had a blue, grapey bloom on them, and Anthony's dark eyes were a sinister green, with red lights. Ghostly mother-of-pearl faces with opal shadows peered through the violet glass at an unreal landscape, which would instantly cease to exist if the windows were opened. But the windows could not be opened, or a rain of sand would pour in, so we gazed out on an impossible fairyland consisting of golden sea, with mountainous shores carved from amethyst, through which shone the glow of pulsing fires. Always we carried with us an immense shadow, like a trailing purple banner, unfurling as we moved. Men and women and animals seen at the numbered white stations in the sand were but fantastic figures in a camera obscura. The shadow of the train was torn with fiery streaks, and when the sun had burned to death on a red funeral pyre, the moon stole out to mourn for him. Her coming was sudden. She seemed abruptly to draw aside a hyacinth curtain, and hold up a lamp over the desert when the sun's fire had died. And the lamp gave forth an unearthly light, which poured over the endless sands a sheet of primrose yellow flame. The warm sun-shadow was chilled from purple to grey, and flowed over the magic primrose fields like a river of molten silver. At No. 6 station, where we stopped for water after dinner, a hyena came gallumping over the sand like a hump-backed dog, to stare at us as we strolled in couples away from the train into the desert. Next morning everyone was up early to see the grey hornets' nests which were Sudanese villages, and the villagers themselves, who urged us to buy straw rugs, baskets, fans, oranges, dried beans, live birds, and milk in wooden bowls, whenever the train stopped, respectable old ladies dressed in short fringes, and small full-stomached boys dressed in nothing at all. I had not told Biddy about our bargain with Sir Marcus, Anthony's and my services in exchange for the mountain of the Golden Pyramid. Why should she be forced to share our suspense? For she would share it, if she knew, even though she didn't yet yield to me in the matter of a united future. I wanted to wait before telling her the story until Fenton and I had made sure if there were anything golden about the mountain except its name. If we were doomed to disappointment, I could then give the tale a humorous turn, easier to do in retrospect than anticipation. Now, when in blinding light of noon we pointed out, in an impersonal manner, to all who cared to see, the pyramid field of Meroe, it seemed strange to think that no heart but Anthony's and mine beat the faster. The sun was so hot that most people, blinking dazedly, retired behind their screens of blue glass almost as soon as the train stopped, close to Garstang's camp. I had informed the set, casually, that wonderful things were being found in the rocky desert, that the few neat white tents sheltered men who were going to make of Meroe a world's wonder, that not only had the army of stunted black pyramids visible from the train yielded up treasures, but 3 tiers of palaces were being unearthed, or rather, unsanded. I said nothing, however, of the more distant dark shapes, like the pyramids, yet unlike them. Among those low, conical mountains, which perhaps gave inspiration to the pyramid builders, was our mountain. And I was not sorry when the burning sun smote curiosity from eyes and brains, and sent nearly all my flock back to their places, while the train had still some minutes at the station. Cleopatra had not come out. She had frankly lost interest in scenic history, and did not want to be intelligent. But as Anthony and I stepped off the train, we saw that Bridget and Monty stood arm in arm in the doorway. "Would you like to jump down?" I asked, reluctantly. For the first time I did not wish Biddy O'Brien to give me her society. I hoped she would say, "No, thank you," for I wanted Fenton to point out our mountain, which he had told me could be seen, and it would be inconvenient to answer questions. "Yes, we should like it," they both replied together, so Anthony and I had to look delighted. It really was a pleasure to help them down, but even that we could have waited for till our arrival at Khartoum. And the first remark that Biddy made was too intelligent. "What are those weird things off there in the distance, that look exactly like ruined pyramids, sort of mud-pipe pyramids?" "Mountains," said Fenton. "What, didn't anybody make them?" "The legend is that jinns, or evil spirits, created them to use as tombs for themselves." "But they're almost precisely like the made pyramids, only a little more tumble down. Have they names?" "Some have, I believe," Anthony returned, with his well-put-on air of indifference. "That blackest and most ruined-looking one of all, for instance, between 2 which are taller, there away to the left, I mean, that is called the Mountain of the Golden Pyramid." Our eyes met over the girls' veiled hats. After all, he had found an opportunity of telling me what I wanted to know. "What a fascinating name," said Monty. "It sounds as if there were some special story connected with it. Is there?" "Yes," Anthony was obliged to admit. "There is a legend that it was used as a tomb by the first Queen Candace, who lived about 200 years B.C. after Ptolemy Philadelphus. She used to reign over what they called the island of Meroe. It was this once fertile kingdom, between the Atbara River over there and the Blue Nile. They say she wished to be buried with all her jewels and treasure, and was afraid of her tomb being robbed, so she wouldn't trust to a man-made pyramid. She ordered a secret place to be hollowed out in the heart of a mountain, and that's the one they pretend it is." "What a lovely legend! But I suppose there's nothing in it, really, or clever people like those who are digging here now would have found the tomb and the treasure long ago," said Monty. "I don't know," I left Anthony to answer, wondering what he would say. "Only a very few have ever put enough faith in the story to search, and they have never been able to discover traces of an entrance into that mountain or any other. Of course, in trying to enter the Great Pyramid of Giza, they looked a long time before they succeeded. But that was different. There was never any doubt of there being something worth seeing inside, whereas this black lump may be solid rock, and nothing more. It's many years since anybody has tried to get at the secret." "I beg your pardon," politely said, in French, an elderly man, in a pith helmet, blue spectacles, and khaki clothes, who stood near. "I couldn't help hearing your conversation, and it may interest you and these ladies to learn that at this very moment work is going on at the so-called Mountain of the Golden Pyramid." I envied Anthony the brown stain on his face, for I felt the blood rushing to mine. "Indeed!" I ejaculated in English. "We are very much interested. Work actually going on?" Yes, it was begun about 4 or 5 weeks ago by an agent of Sir Marcus Lark, the well-known financier, who got the concession for which some other party was said to be trying for. I am here," went on the helmeted man, gazing benevolently through his blue spectacles at the two pretty women, "I am here with my son, who is one of Garstang's men. We have nothing to do with the Mountain of the Golden Pyramid. Luckily for Sir Marcus, it was adjudged to be off our pitch. Still, we are interested. They are keeping their work very secret, but these things are in the air. The talk here is that they're on the point of making, if they haven't already made, some very startling discovery." "All aboard, if you please!" shouted the Greek guard. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 29. Exit Antoun. If there had been no Bridget and no Monty in the world, we should have let that train go on without us, and hang the set and its feelings. But there was a Bridget, there was a Monty, and they were more to us than all the treasures Sir Marcus was apparently stealing while we slaved. What fools we had been to trust in such a man! And I had actually wasted pity on the fellow. Now, as we were borne away from Meroe, we saw our hopes, which had begun to seem certainties, dissolving into air. They were like the mirage of the desert, which lured us with siren enchantment and mystery in this never-never land which thousands of brave men had died to win. Shimmering blue lakes that mirrored green trees and low purple mountains, and the gold of sand dunes, so real, so near, it seemed we might walk to them in a few moments, only mocking dreams, like our belief in a famous financier's loyalty, like our hopes of fortune. For if Sir Marcus Lark had secretly begun work at the Mountain of the Golden Pyramid, it meant that he intended to seal everything best worth having for himself. It was maddening to realize that we might be too late to thwart him, but we had to risk this, or risk losing something dearer than the jewels of a Queen Candace. Anthony was staking the happiness of his future on the events of the following night. Now that the small cloud of misunderstanding had passed from the clear sky of our friendship, we were once again in confidence, as we had been before the Philae eavesdropping, and I knew the plan he meant to carry out at the Sirdar's ball. It was rather a melodramatic plan, perhaps, but somehow it fitted into the circumstances of his queer courtship, and I could see why Anthony preferred it to any other more conventional. As for me, too, I counted on Khartoum to give me a present of happiness. Bedr's story, largely false as it might be, must have a basis of truth. I'd ceased to argue with Biddy. "We'll leave the subject of the future alone till we get to Khartoum," I had said. She thought, maybe, that she had half convinced me of her worldly wisdom. But this was far from being the case. I was only waiting to see whether my theory were right or wrong. I couldn't know until Khartoum, and nothing on earth, or hidden under earth, would have induced me to put off the moment of finding out. North Khartoum was standing in a mirage as we approached, and Fenton and I were superstitious enough to wonder if it were a bad omen, that lovely lake which was not there, reflecting clearly each white and ochre-coloured house of the city in the sand. Only the blue glitter of the Nile was real, as the train crossed the river on a high bridge, and landed us in the surprising garden of beauty which is Khartoum itself. Wide streets, bordered with flowering trees, rose-pink acacias and coral pendants of pepperberries, lawns green as velvet, big verandahed houses of silver grey or ruddy stone, roses climbing over hedges and wall, scent of lilies and magnolias floating on an air as clear as crystal, droning sakias spraying pearls over the warm bodies of slow-moving oxen, white sails like butterflies' wings dotting the blue Nile. This was the new city, created as if by magic, in 16 years, upon the sad ruins of Gordon's stronghold. On the wide veranda of the Grand Hotel, where pretty girls were giving tea to young officers in khaki, Fenton came up to Bridget and Monty, who were questioning me about letters. The look on his face struck the girl into silence. "What is it?" she asked almost sharply. "Don't let me interrupt you," he said. "I can wait a few minutes." "No," Monty insisted. "Please speak. I know it's something important." Important only to myself, perhaps, he answered, with a smile that was rather wistful. I have to say good-bye now. Good-bye? Echoed Monty, surprised and even frightened, more by his look and tone than the words themselves. My engagement with Sir Marcus Lark ended when our train stopped at Khartoum. I have other business to attend to, here. I've just made my adieus with everybody else. I saved you till the last. Monty was pale. Even the fresh young rose that was her mouth had blanched. Otherwise she controlled herself perfectly. Was this part of Anthony's plan, I wondered? He had told me what he intended to do at the palace ball tomorrow night, but he had said nothing about this preliminary scene. I understood, however, why he had not manoeuvred to get Monty to himself, in a deserted corner of this big ground-floor balcony of the hotel. Even when with the set it was a question of getting their tea, or looking at their rooms, eyes were always ready to observe Miss Gilder, especially since it was in the air that she really was Miss Gilder, the Miss Gilder. He did not want Miss Hassett Bean and Mrs. Harlow to be saying, "Look, my dear, at the tragic, private farewell Antoun Effendi and our American beauty are having." Since Philae, there would have been no use in trying to conceal his feelings for Monty from Bridget or me. Therefore we made useful chaperones, and could be regarded as dummies. "You never told me that you were leaving us at Khartoum," the girl stammered. "I thought—" But though we knew what she thought, she could go no further before an audience. "My business prevents me from staying at the hotel," Anthony explained. "And, though I shall see you, never again will you see poor Ahmed Atoun." "I don't understand," Monty said. "I know, but that was what we agreed upon. You promised to trust me without understanding. Tomorrow night, at the Sirdar's ball, you will understand. I've arranged with Lord Ernest that you and Mrs. Jones and Mrs. East and he shall write your names in the book at the palace. Then you will all receive invitations for the ball, the 4 of you only of the party." "And you will be there?" "I've just told you," Anthony repeated, "that Antoun is saying good-bye to you forever." "Yet you told me, too, that after Khartoum I should be She cut herself short, and shut her lips closely. I was angry with Fenton for what seemed cruelty to one who had very nobly confessed her love for him. Biddy's eyes protested too, but the man and the girl cared no more for us or our criticism, at that moment, than if we had been harmless, necessary chairs for them to sit upon. "There are many paths to happiness," Fenton answered. "I shall see you tomorrow night, and I shall know whether you are happy. Meanwhile, I say again, trust me, and good-bye." He held out his strong, nervous hand, so browned by the sun that it needed little staining for the part he had played, and was to play no more. As if mechanically, Monty Gilder laid her hand in it. They looked into each other's eyes, which were almost on a level, so tall was she. Then Antoun Effendi turned abruptly away, forgetting apparently that he had not taken leave of Bridget or me. "Let's go upstairs at once, dear, and see our rooms," Biddy said quickly. An instant later I stood alone on the veranda. But I knew well enough where to find Captain Anthony Fenton when I wanted him, although the death knell of Antoun was sounding. I was not in the least melancholy, and despite the tense emotion of that short scene, I had never felt less sentimental in my life. My whole being concentrated itself in a desire to visit the post office and to bash Sir Marcus Lark's head. When Anthony came up for his farewell, I had been asking Bridget and Monty if they expected letters at the poste restante. Both said no, but advised by me they gave me their cards, armed with which I could ask for letters and obtain them if there were any. "It's very unlikely anyone will address me there," Biddy had assured me. "The only letter I'm hoping for will come to the hotel." I was not jealous, because I was sure the said letter was from Esmé O'Brien, now for weal or woe Mrs. Halloran. The letter I hoped for would be from a very different person, though if it materialized it would certainly mention the runaway bride. And if such a letter came to Khartoum, the place to look for it, I thought, would be the poste restante. The writer not being a personal friend of Mrs. O'Brien's, and presumably not knowing Khartoum, could not be certain at which hotel she would stop. I was hurrying away, a few minutes later, to prove once and for all whether I were a budding Sherlock Holmes or merely an imaginative fool, when a servant came out from the hotel and handed me a telegram. "Lark," I read the signature at the end with a snort of rage. "I wonder he has the cheek to—" But by that time I was getting at the meat of the message. "What the By Jove, here's a complication," I heard myself mutter a running accompaniment to Marcus Lark's words. This is what he had to say on 2 sheets of paper. Lord Ernest Borough, Grand Hotel, Khartoum. In train leaving Assuan met man from Meroe, told me work begun at our place, strange news, don't understand, but sure you two haven't gone ahead of bargain, must be foul play or else mistake, but thought matter too serious to go north, left train, returned to Assuan, caught government steamer for Halfa, just arrived too late for train de luxe, but will proceed by ordinary train to camp. Better meet me there soon as possible, leaving boat people take care of themselves. Wire Kabushia, Lark. His loyalty to us shamed me. We had not given him the benefit of the doubt, but had at once believed the worst. He, though not a gentleman in the opinion of Colonel Corcoran and some others, was chivalrously sure that we had not gone ahead of the bargain. A revulsion of feeling gave me a spasm of something like affection for the big fellow whom his adored Cleopatra sneered at as common. I longed to show the telegram to Anthony, but he would now be at the palace, reporting to the Sirdar. Later he would be at his own quarters, transforming himself from a pale brown Hadji in a green turban into a sunburned young British officer in uniform. Meantime I would go to the poste restante, and then, whatever the result of the visit, I would return, collect Bridget and Monny, and take them back to the palace to write their names in the book. I dare not think what my blood pressure must have been as I waited for a post office official to look through a bundle of letters. "Mrs. B. Jones," he murmured. "No, nothing for B. Jones, unless it's O'Brien Jones. Here's a letter addressed to Mrs. O'Brien Jones." "That's it," said I, swallowing heavily. "Mrs. O'Brien Jones. I think the letter must be postmarked Assuan." Without further hesitation the post office man handed me the envelope, on the strength of Mrs. B. Jones's visiting card. Going out of the office I walked on air. "Sherlock Holmes it is!" I congratulated myself. And I ventured to be wildly happy, because it seemed to me that a letter sent to Mrs. O'Brien Jones from Assuan could only mean one thing, a justification of my theory. I went straight to Biddy's door and knocked. There was no answer, and I stood fuming with impatience on the upstairs balcony, upon which each bedroom opens. It seemed impossible to live another minute without putting that letter into Biddy's hand. And not for the world would I have let it come to her from anyone else. I was tempted to tear open the envelope, but before I had time to test my character, Biddy appeared on the balcony, coming round the corner from Monny's room. "Why, Duffer, you look as if the sky had fallen!" she exclaimed. "It has," I returned. "It's lying all over the place. There's a bit of it in this letter, a bit of heaven, maybe." "A letter for me?" "Yes, and if you aren't quick about opening it, I'll commit harikari." She was quick about opening it. As she read, almost literally my eyes were glued to her face. It went white, then pink. "Thank Heaven!" I said within myself. If she had been pink first and white afterward, I should have been alarmed. For a woman's colour to blossom warmly from a snowfield means good news. "Duffer," she breathed, "do you know what's in this?" I thought it would come. My voice sounded rather queer. I'd fancied I had more self-control. "That's why I wanted your card, for the poste restante. Read this," she said, and gave me the open letter. It was written on paper of a hotel at Assuan, near the railway station, and was as follows: "Madam, let me explain frankly before I go further that my name is Thomas McMahon. You may remember it. If you do, you will not think it strange that I, as a private person as well as a member of a society, whose name it is not necessary to mention, wanted certain papers you were supposed to possess. For a long time I, and others almost equally interested, tried to trace you, after learning that you had the documents, or in any case knew where they were. Naturally, we were prepared to go far in order to make you give them up. We believed that your stepdaughter was with you. As the need was pressing, and as we had failed more than once, we would, if necessary, have worked upon your feelings through her. Had we questioned you, and had you replied that we were mistaken concerning the young lady in the papers, we should have been incredulous. But accident enabled us to hear from your own lips details which we could not disbelieve. As a woman we wish you no harm, therefore we rejoice in this turn of events for your sake. Your stepdaughter must now be one of us, through her husband. She has nothing further to fear, much as we regret her marriage into a family so deeply injured by her father. As for you, madam, you may be at rest, where we are concerned. You said to Lord Ernest Borrow in the Temple of Abu Simbel that you could never be happy, until the organization Richard O'Brien betrayed forgot and forgave his daughter and yourself. Through me, the organization now formally both forgives and forgets. Wishing you well in future, yours truly, T. McMahon, alias Blount. P.S. Kindly acknowledge receipt of this letter, in care of Bedr el-Gamali, whose address you have at Cairo. Not hearing from you, we shall try to communicate this news in some other way. The present method has occurred to us, as you may find it useful to know the state of affairs without delay. Oh, Biddy, do you find it useful? I asked. She held out her hands to me. There was no one in the veranda just then, and I kissed her. Mine, I said. What a gorgeous place Khartoum would be, to be married in. Monny was very brave next day. She went to Omdurman with the rest of us. And it was the chance of a lifetime, because, through Anthony, Slatin Pasha himself took us to the place of his captivity. Slatin Pasha, slim, soldierly, young, vital, and brilliant. It was scarcely possible to believe that this man, who looked no more than 35, and radiated energy, could have passed 11 years in slavery terrible beyond description. He spoke of those experiences almost lightly, as if telling the story of someone else, and it was all in the day's work that he should have triumphed over his persecutors in a way more complete, more dramatic, than any author of romance would dare invent for his hero. He took us from the river steps in front of his own big verandahed house down the blue Nile in a fast steam launch. It was a Nile as blue as turquoise, and after the low island of Tuli had been left behind, it was strange to see the junction of the blue and white Niles, in a quarrelsome swirl of sharply divided colours. Landing on the shore at Omdurman, we met carts loaded with elephant tusks, and wagons piled with hides. Giant men, like ebony statues, walked beside pacing camels white as milk. The vegetable market was a town of little booths. The grain markets had gathered riches of green and orange gold. Farther on, in the brown shadows of the roughly roofed labyrinth of bazaars, were stores of sandalwood, and spices smelling like Araby the Blessed. Open-fronted shops showing splendid leopard skins, crocodile heads bristling with knives, carved tusks of elephants, shields, armour said to have been captured from crusaders, Abyssinian spears, swords, and strange headgear used by the Mahdi's and Khalifa's men. The bazaars of Cairo and even Aswan seemed tame and sophisticated compared to this wild market of the Sudan, where half the men, and all the bread-selling women who were old enough, had been the Khalifa's slaves. With Sultan Pasha we went to the Khalifa's palace to gaze at the saint's carriage, the skeleton of Gordon's piano, and scores of ancient guns which had cut short the lives of Christian men. Slatin's house we saw too, and the gate whence he had escaped, the Mahdi's shattered tomb, and the famous open-air mosque. Then we had run up the Blue Nile as far as Gordon's Tree, and lunched on board the launch. In the afternoon, back at Khartoum again, there was still time to group round the statue of Gordon on his camel, holding the short stick that was his only weapon, and gazing over the desert. The set were allowed to walk through the palace gardens, to behold the spot at the head of the grand staircase, where Gordon fell, and to have a glimpse in the Sirdar's library of the Khalifa's photograph, taken after death. This was a special favour, and as they knew nothing about the 4 invitations to the ball, they were satisfied with their day. Dinner was in the illuminated garden of the hotel, and when it was over I smuggled Brigid and Monny and Cleopatra inconspicuously away. No one suspected, and if the lovely dresses worn by Mrs. East and Miss Gilder were commented upon, doubtless aunt and niece were merely supposed to be showing off. Never, I think, had Monny come so near to being a great beauty. In her dress of softly folding silver cloth she was a tall white lily. She wore no jewels except a string of pearls, and there was no colour about her anywhere, except the deep violet her hazel eyes took on at night, and the brown gold of her hair. Even her lips were pale as they had been when Antoun bade her good-bye. Hers was no gay, dancing mood. She was going to the ball because Antoun Effendi had ordered rather than asked her to go. But she was like some fair, tragic creature on trial for her life, waiting to hear what the verdict of the jury might be. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 30. The Sirdar's Ball. Biddy, radiating joy, walked beside me with wide-open, eager eyes, taking in every detail of the historic house. She admired the immense hall, whose archways opened into dim, fragrant gardens. She was entranced with the Sudanese band, ink-black giants uniformed in white, playing wild native music in the moonlight. She wanted to stop and make friends with the shoebill, a super stork, apparently carved in shining metal, with a bill like an enormous slipper, eyes like the 100th part of a second stop in a kodak, and feet that tested each new tuft of grass on the lawn, as if it were a specimen of some hitherto undiscovered thing. No question but she was happy. I was proud of her, and proud of myself because my love had power to give her happiness. What matter now if I were being robbed at the Mountain of the Golden Pyramid by some unknown thief? Neither he nor anyone could steal Biddy. Even Cleopatra seemed pleased to be coming to the Sirdar's ball, though gloom lay heavy upon her. She wanted to look her best. She wanted to be admired by the officers she was to meet, and to have as many partners as she could split dances for. To be admired by someone was essential to her just now, a soothing medicine to heal the smart of hurt vanity. Monny, I felt, had made herself look beautiful only because she thought that Antoun, unseen, would see her. As we entered the ballroom, her eyes were wistful, searching, yet not expecting to find. He had said that she would never see Antoun again. I found friends in the ballroom, men I knew at home, and a few pretty women I had met in England or abroad, but there was no more than time to be received by the aide-de-camp, and to introduce a few officers to my three ladies, when the moment came for the formal entry of our host and hostess, the soldier Sirdar and his graceful wife, the royalties of the Sudan. We were presented, and I guessed at once that the Sirdar had been prepared in advance to take a special interest in Rosamond Gilder. Anthony has told him the whole thing, and has asked his help, was my thought. From the instant of his kindly greeting for the girl, I found myself suddenly, excitedly assuming the attitude of a spectator in a theatre on the night of a new play. I knew the plot of the play, but not how it would be presented, nor how it would work out. I saw that the Sirdar had made up his mind to a certain line of action where Monny was concerned. And by, when he had time to spare from his general duties as host, I heard him ask if she would like to go on the roof, where Gordon used to stand watching for the English soldiers to come. "I will take you," he said, "and if you like to stay longer than I can stop away from our guests, I'll give you another guide." He turned to Biddy and me. Cleopatra was dancing with Baron Rudolph von Slatin Pasha, gorgeous in medals and stars. Bridget and I had just stopped. "Would you like to come too?" the Sirdar asked. I answered for Biddy, knowing what she would want me to say. And still the sense of being a spectator in a wonderful theatre was dreamily upon me. Stronger and stronger the impression grew, as the Sirdar led us out onto a wide loggia white with moonlight, and up a flight of stairs to a flat roof. Overhead a sky of milk was spangled with flashing stars. Beneath our eyes lay the palace gardens, where the torches of the Sudanese band glowed like transfixed fireflies in the pale moonrays. Palms and acacias and jewelled flower beds were cut out sharply in vivid colour by the lights which streamed from open windows. Beyond, past the zone of violet shadow so like a stage background, was the sheen of the river, bright as spilt mercury under the moon. And beyond again, on the other side of the Nile, the tawny flame of that desert across which came the Khalifa's fierce army. "This is where Gordon used to stand," the Sirdar stopped us near the parapet. "Only the roof was one story lower then. He climbed up here every day, till the last, to look out across the desert, saying, 'The English will come.' There's a black gardener I have, who thinks he meets him now, on moonlight nights like this, walking in the garden. It wasn't much of a garden in his day, only palms and orange trees, but a rose bush he planted and loved is alive still. I've just asked one of my officers, one whom I particularly want you to meet, Miss Gilder, to pluck a rose from Gordon's bush and bring it here to you. He knows where to find us, and when he comes I must go back to the ballroom and leave you, all three, to his guidance. Lord Ernest and he used to be friends as boys, I believe. Perhaps you've heard him speak of Captain Anthony Fenton?" "Perhaps. I don't remember," Monty answered, apologetically. She, so self-confident and self-possessed, was charmingly shy with this great soldier who had made history in the Sudan. "If you don't remember, Lord Ernest can't have done justice to the subject. Fenton's one of the finest young officers in Egypt, or indeed in the service. We're rather proud of him. Lately he's been employed on a special mission, which he has carried out extremely well. Few others could have done it, for a man of great audacity and self-restraint was needed, a combination hard to find. He has been in the Balkans, and since he has had a particularly delicate task entrusted to him, to be conducted with absolute secrecy. No kudos to be got out of it in case of success, and failure would almost certainly have cost his life. It was a question of disguise, and getting at the native heart." "It sounds like something in a storybook," said Monty, while Brigit and I kept mum, drinking in gulps of moonlight. "Yes," the Sirdar agreed, "or the autobiography of Sir Richard Burton. Fenton has the same extraordinary gift of language and dialect that Burton had. The art of make-up, too, and he's been to Mecca, a great adventure I believe he had. Perhaps you can get him to talk of it, though he's not fond of talking about himself. Altogether he's what I sometimes hear the ladies call a romantic figure. His father was a famous soldier. If you were English you would have heard of him. He broke off a brilliant career in Egypt by running away with a beautiful princess. She was practically all Greek and Italian, though her father called himself a Turk. No Egyptian blood whatever. But there was a great row, of course, and Charles Fenton left the army. Now Anthony Fenton's grandfather, who lives in Constantinople, would like to adopt his grandson, but the young man is in every sense of the word an Englishman, devoted to his career, and doesn't want a fortune or a Turkish title." "Why, that sounds," Monty faltered, "like a man of character and a born soldier, doesn't it? Here he comes now." There was a sound of quick, light footsteps on the stairs. In silence we turned to see a tall young officer in uniform walk out upon the flat roof. The moon shone straight into a face grave yet eager, so deeply sunburned as to be brown even in that pale light, long eyebrows sketched sharply as if in ink, the black lines running down toward the temples, large, sad eyes, a slight upward hitch of the mouth on one side, clear-cut Roman nose, aggressive chin. "Miss Gilder, let me introduce Captain Anthony Fenton," the Sirdar said. "I've brought you a rose," said Anthony. They stood looking at one another for a long moment, the sun-browned British officer and the pale girl. We, Biddy and I, stared at them both from our distance, and when the spell of the instant had broken, we saw that the Sirdar had gone. We too would have gone, though the man and the girl were between us and the stairway, and we should have had to push past them. But Anthony, seeing our hesitation, spoke quietly. "Don't go," he said. "I may want you." Never until tonight had Monty Gilder heard him speak English. "You see," he said to her, "why I told you yesterday you would never see Antoun again. I had to tell you that, to make sure you would trust me, fully, through everything. You have trusted me, and so you've made it possible for me to keep my vow, a wrong and stupid vow, but it had to be kept. When I was angry because you treated me like a servant, I swore that never, no matter how I might be tempted, would I tell you with my own lips who I was, or let Borrow tell. I was going to make myself of importance in your life as Ahmed Atoun, if I could, not as Anthony Fenton. But long before that night at Philae I was ashamed. But you said then you would forgive me. Now, when you understand what you didn't understand then, can you still say the same?" "I hardly know what to say," she answered. "I don't know how I feel about anything." "Well, I know, you goose!" exclaimed Biddy, rushing to the rescue, where angels who haven't learned to think with their hearts might have feared to tread. "You feel so happy you're afraid that you're going to howl. Why, it's all perfectly wonderful! And only the silliest, earliest Victorian girls would sulk because they'd been deceived. If anybody deceived you, you deceived yourself. I knew who he was from the first. So did your Aunt Clara. We've kept our ears open, and heard the duffer talk about his friend Anthony Fenton, who was coming to meet us. You were mooning, I suppose, and didn't listen. We didn't give him away partly because it wasn't our business, and partly because each of us was up to another game, never mind what. Captain Fenton never tried to play you a trick. You threw yourself at his head, you know you did, from Shepherd's Terrace. He had his mission to think of, and you'd be very conceited if you thought he ought to have let you interfere with it. As it happened, you worked in quite well with the mission at first. Then fate stepped in, and made the band play a different dance tune. No military march, but a love waltz. That wasn't his fault. And I have to remind you of all this, because you're glaring at Captain Fenton now as if he'd done something wrong instead of fine, and he can't praise himself." As she finished, out of breath, having dashed on without a single comma, the giant black musicians in the garden began to sing a strange African love song, in deep rich voices, their instruments, which had played with precision European airs, suddenly pouring out their primitive, passionate souls. "Biddy dear," said the girl in a small meek voice, "thank you very much, and you're just sweet. But I didn't need even you to defend him to me. I was only just stopping to breathe for fear my heart would burst, because I was dizzy with too much joy. I worship him, and you can both go away now, please. We don't want you." We went. Biddy would have fallen downstairs if I hadn't caught her round the waist. Needless to say, I didn't look back, but Biddy did, and should by rights have been turned into a pillar of salt. "My gracious, but they're beautiful!" she gasped. "For goodness' sake, let's dash as fast as we can, down into the garden and do the same thing." "What?" I floundered. "Why, you duffer, kiss each other like mad." Boiling with excitement, when I met Cleopatra later in the ballroom, I told her what was going on above, in the moonlight on the roof. "At last your niece knows what I think you have guessed all along, but so wisely kept to yourself," I said. "About Fenton, I mean. It's all right between those two now. They will come downstairs engaged." "Everybody is engaged," Cleopatra stormily retorted. "That's exactly what I remarked to Bridget, before I could persuade her to follow the general example. 'Everybody in the world is engaged except ourselves,' are the words I used." "And except me," added Mrs. East. "You forgot me, didn't you?" "Never," I insisted. "You can be engaged to a dozen men at any moment, if you wanted to." "I think you're exaggerating a little, Lord Ernest," Cleopatra replied modestly and unsmilingly. But her countenance brightened faintly. "Of course there are a few men. There were some in New York—" "You don't need to tell me that," I assured her. "I feel as if I'd like to tell you something else," she went on, "if you can spare a few minutes." "Will you sit out the next dance?" I asked. "It isn't a bunny hug or a tango, or anything distracting for lookers on." "Aren't you dancing with Bridget?" "No such luck. I mean, fortunately not. She has grabbed Slatin Pasha, and forgotten that I exist. By Jove, there come Miss Gilder and Fenton. What a couple! They're rather gorgeous waltzing together, what?" "Very nice," said Cleopatra, trying with all her over-amuleted heart not to be acid. "But oh, Lord Ernest, that settles it. I must be engaged myself before Monny brings him to show me, like a cat with a mouse it's caught. Otherwise I couldn't stand it, and afterward would be too late." Hastily I rushed her out into the garden, where the shoebill regarded her with one eye of prehistoric wisdom. If she really were a reincarnation, I'm sure he knew it, and had probably belonged to her in Alexandria, when she was queen. "There's a Mr. Talmadge in New York," she went on, wildly. "He said he would come to me from across the world at a moment's notice if I wired. Only it would be awkward if I announced our engagement tonight, and then found he'd changed his mind. Besides, he'd be a last resort, and Saïda Sabri said I ought—" "Why not wire Sir Marcus?" I ventured. If his telegram had not come yesterday, I would have as soon advised Cleopatra to adopt an asp. "Oh, well, I was thinking of it. That's one thing I wanted to ask your advice about. I believe he does love me. Idolizes is the word. And then, now and then in the night I've had a feeling it was almost like a wasting something providential to refuse a Marcus Antonius. Saïda Sabri warned me to wait for a man named Anthony, whom I should meet in Egypt. That's why but no matter now. The Lark is a dreadful obstacle, though. How could I live with a Lark?" "Lady Lark has quite a musical lilt." "Do you think so? There's one thing, even if you're the wife of a marquis or an earl, you can only be called Lady this or that. You might be anything. He's taller than Antoun, I mean Captain Fenton, and his eyes are just as nice, in their way. They quite haunt me since Philae. But Lord Ernest, he has some horrid, common little tricks. He scratches his hair when he's worried. If you look up his coat sleeves you catch glimpses of grey Jaeger, a thing I always felt I could never marry. And worst of all, when he finishes a meal, and goes away from the table, he walks off eating." "I don't suppose," said I, "that your first Marcus Antonius ever went away from a table at all, on his feet anyhow, while you were doing him so well in Egypt. He had to be carried. I call Sir Marcus, and I stole the Sirdar's epithet for the other Anthony, a romantic figure. His adoration for you is a sonnet. There's no H in his name to bother you, and he fell in love at first sight like a real sport, I mean like the hero of a book. If he has ways you don't approve, you can cure them, redecorate and remodel him with the latest American improvements. Why, I believe he'd go so far as to give his lark a tail if you asked him to spell it with an E." "Well, I suppose you're right about what I'd better do," she sighed. "A bird in the hand oh, I'm not making a silly pun about a lark is worth two in New York. Please tell every one you see I'm engaged to Sir Marcus, for he is my bird in the hand, and I'll send off a telegram the first thing tomorrow morning, for fear he hears the news that he's engaged to me prematurely. Where is he? Do you know?" "By tomorrow morning he'll be at Merrow Camp," I said, but I did not add, "So shall we." End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 31. The Mountain of the Golden Pyramid. There was not much room in our hearts for mountains or gold just then, yet somehow, before we left the palace, Anthony and I had told Bridget and Monty the secret which had been the romance of our lives, until they came into it to paint dead gold with the living rose of love. Victorian women would have been grieved or angry with men who could leave them at such a time, but these two, instead of reproaching us, urged us on. Naturally, they wanted to go with us. They said if there were danger they wished to share it, and if there were to be a find they wished to be among the first to see what no eyes had seen for 2,000 years. But when Anthony explained that there wasn't time to get tents together and make a decent camp for ladies, even if we were sure not to tumble into trouble, they said no more. This was surprising in Monty, if not in Bridget. I supposed, however, that she was being on her best behaviour, as a kind of thank-offering to Providence for its unexpected gift of legitimate happiness. Our secret was to be kept. Only the Sirdar knew, and gave Fenton leave of absence for a few days. The set did not suspect the existence of a mountain at Merrow more important than its neighbours. They did not even know what had become of Antoun Effendi after he bade them farewell and good luck. From the first he had given it out that he must leave the party at Khartoum. The object of returning to Merrow was to meet Sir Marcus, and I promised to be back in plenty of time to organize the return trip to Cairo. My departure, therefore, was all in the day's work, and the great sensation was Mrs. East's engagement. Even though, for obvious reasons, Monty's love affair was kept dark, Cleopatra could not resist parading hers, the minute her wire to Sir Marcus had been safely sent. I got an invitation for all the members of the set to a tennis party in the palace gardens, at which the Sultan of Darfur and a bodyguard armed with battle-axes would be the chief attraction. Also I induced the landlord of our hotel to promise special illuminations, music, and an impromptu dance for the evening. This was to make sure that none of our friends should find time to see me off at the train. Anthony was to join me there, in mufti, and might be recognized by sharp eyes on the lookout for mysteries. Once we got away, that danger would be past, unless Cleopatra told. But I was certain that she would not to anyone ever again mention the name of Antoun. It was a full train that night, but no one in it who knew Antoun. Many people who had been visiting friends or staying at an hotel for weeks were saying good-bye. The narrow corridors of the sleeping cars had African spears piled up on the floor against the wall, very long and inconvenient. Ladies struggled in, with rainbow-coloured baskets almost too big for their compartments. Seats were littered with snake-skins like immense decayed apple-parings, fearsome crescent-shaped knives, leopard rugs in embryo, and strange headgear in many varieties. Stuffed crocodiles fell down from the racks and got underfoot, Men walked about with elephant tusks under their arms. Dragomans solicited a last tip. A 6'7" Dinka, black as ink and splendid as a Greek statue, brought flowers from the palace for some departing acquaintance of the Sirdar and his wife. Officers in evening dress dashed up through the sand on donkey back to see the last of friends, their mess jackets making vivid spots of colour in the electric light. All the fragrant blossoms of Khartoum seemed to be sending farewell messages of perfume on the cool evening air. No more fantastic scene at a railway station could be imagined. If the world and its doings is but a moving picture for the gods on Olympus, they must enjoy the film of a train departing from Khartoum. Anthony did not join me until just as the train was crawling out of the station, for we had asked Brigit and Monty not to see us off, and they had been startlingly acquiescent. We had a two-berthed compartment together, and talked most of the night, in low voices, of the mountain, of the legends concerning it, and the papers of the dead Egyptologist Ferlini, which indirectly had brought Fenton into Monty Gilder's life, and given Brigit back to me. There was the out-of-doors breakfast party, too, on the terrace at Shepherd's. Had it not been for this incident, Antoun, the green-turbaned Hadji, would never have been selected by Miss Gilder in words she might now like to forget. "I'll have that." But had not a distressed artist called on me one morning in Rome, some months ago, with an old notebook to sell, I should not have come to Egypt for my sick leave, and none of us would have met. I had visited the artist's studio to please a friend, and bought a picture to please him, not myself, therefore he regarded me as a charitable dilettante, likely to buy anything if properly approached. Bad luck had come to him, he wanted to try pastures new, and needed money at a short notice, therefore he wished to dispose of a secret which might be the key to fortune. Why didn't he use the key himself, was the obvious question, which he answered by saying that a poor man would not be able to find the lock to fit it. The notebook he had to sell had been the property of a distinguished distant relative, long since dead, the Italian Ferlini, who about 1834 ransacked the ruins of Meroe in the kingdom of Candace. Ferlini had given treasure in gold, scarabs, and jewels to Berlin, all of which he had discovered in a secret cache in the masonry of a pyramid, in the so-called pyramid field of Meroe. But he had been blamed for unscientific work, and in some quarters it was not believed that he had found the hoard at Meroe. This jealousy and injustice had prevented Ferlini's obtaining a grant for further explorations he wished to make. He claimed to have proof that in a certain mountain, not far from the Meroe pyramids, and much resembling them in shape, was hidden the tomb of a Candace who lived 200 years earlier than the queen of that name mentioned in the New Testament, mistress of the eunuch baptized by St. Philip. In the notebook which had come down with other belongings of Ferlini the Egyptologist to Ferlini the artist was a copy of a certain demotic writing, of a peculiar and little-known form. The original had existed, according to the dead Ferlini's notes, on the wall of an antechapel in one of the most ruinous pyramids at Meroe, decorated in a peculiarly barbaric Ethiopian style. The wall writing described the making of the mountain tomb, ordered by Candace in fear that her body might be disturbed, according to a prophecy which predicted the destruction of the kingdom if the jewels of the dead were found. Ferlini, a student of the demotic writings which had superseded hieroglyphics, doubted not that he had translated the revelation aright, though he admitted supplying many missing words in accordance with his own deductions. He was in disfavour at the time he tried to organize an expedition in search of the Queen's hoard, and, though legends of the mountain confirmed the writings which Ferlini was the first to translate, the Italian could induce no one to finance his scheme. The one person he succeeded in interesting had a relative, already excavating in Egypt, but eventually addressed on the subject this young man replied that the antechapel in question had fallen completely into ruin. It would be impossible, therefore, to find the wall writing, if indeed it ever existed. This verdict had put an end to Ferlini's hopes, and nothing remained of them save the translated copy of the writing in his notebook, the missing words inserted, and the legends of the negroes who, generation after generation since forgotten times, had told the story of the mountain of the Golden Pyramid. Nobody, within the memory of man, had ever searched for the problematical tomb, and as tales of more or less the same character are common in Egypt, I did not place much faith in the enthusiastic jottings of Ferlini. However, my love of the unknown, the mysterious and romantic, made me feel that the possession of the notebook was worth the price asked, 2,000 lire. When I had brooded over it myself, I posted it to Fenton at Khartoum, and his opinion had brought me to Egypt. Thinking of the matter in this way, it seemed to me that we owed our love stories to the impecunious artist, who had probably spent his £80 and forgotten me by this time. In a few hours, or a few days, we might owe him even more. Anthony, acquainted with Meroe, its pyramids and pyramidal mountains, since his first coming to the Sudan, had been able to plan out our campaign almost at an hour's notice. He knew where to wire for camels, to take us to our destination, 18 miles from Kabushia, also for trained excavators, and he knew one who, if the white men were in ignorance, could tell us all the most hidden happenings of the desert for 50 miles around. This was the great character of the neighborhood, among the blacks, the wise man of the Meroitic desert, who claimed to be over 100 years old, had a tribe of sons and grandsons, and practically ruled the village of Bakarawiya. For countless generations his forebears had lived under the shadow of the ruined pyramids. Family tradition made them the descendants of those Egyptian warriors who revolted in the time of King Psammetichus, migrating from Elephantine Island to Ethiopia. They were well received by the sovereign, given lands in Upper Nubia, and the title of Autolomi or Asmak, meaning those who stand on the left side of the king. Anthony's friend and instructor in the lore of legends rejoiced in the name of Asmak, which he proudly said had been bestowed on the eldest son in his family since time immemorial. Asmak the old and wise was to meet us at Kabushia station, with camels, one for each, and one for Sir Marcus, in case he had arrived and wished to ride to the mountain of the Golden Pyramid. It was red-orange afternoon when our white train slowed down, to pause for a moment at Kabushia station, and the first face we saw was that of Sir Marcus Antonius, a radiant face whose beaming smile was, I knew, not so much a welcome sign for us as a sign that he had received the telegram from Cleopatra. He hurried along the platform to the steps of our sleeping car, and Anthony, ready to swing himself down before the train stopped, pointed out Asmak not far off, a thin, old black man who must have once been a stately giant, but bent forward now as if searching the earth for his own grave. He had got to his feet from a squatting position in the coal-stained, alluvial clay of this strange desert, and was gazing toward us, his few rags fluttering in the warm wind. Beside him stood a mere youth of 50 or so, and 2 or 3 young men, with several sulky camels. Sir Marcus began to shake hands almost before we were on the platform, and so did he engross himself in us and absorb our attention that none of us quite knew when the train went out. "My dear boys," he addressed us, nearly breaking our finger bones. "Lord, Fenton, you're even better looking as a true Britisher than a false Arab. But never mind that now. Borrow, you're a trump. I believe I owe everything to you. I mean in the matter of Mrs. East. Clara. It was always my favourite name. Fenton knows? Thanks for the congratulations. Thanks to you both. You must be my best men. What? Can't have but one? Well, it must be Borrow then, I suppose. Oh, about the mountain. Why, of course you're anxious. Don't think I have not been busy. I have. Got here by special train. Cost me a lot of money, but who cares? It's worth it. I want to hurry things up and get to Khartoum. What your blessed mountain is to you, that is a certain lady to me." "What have you found out?" I managed at last to cut short his rhapsodies. "Why, not much, I'm bound to confess. But I've only had a few hours. Someone, heaven knows who, came here, it seems, with Arabs he's engaged heaven knows where, and pretended to be my agent, empowered by me to work at the mountain of the Golden Pyramid, where it was well known I'd got the right to excavate. Well, the chap was armed with credentials, and had a contract signed by me, so the authorities thought that was all right, of course, and let him go on. This was more than a month ago. He pitched his camp out by the mountain, and nobody disturbed him. Fact is, from what I hear, I don't believe the excavating men from Liverpool School of Archaeology, or whatever you call it, thought much of his chances of success. A case of looking for Captain Kidd's treasure. He and his men were excavating round the mountain, and he'd engaged some more fellows from the neighbourhood to make the work go faster. But a few days ago, not yet a week, he discharged the lot, paid them up, and sent them off, saying he'd abandoned hope of finding any entrance to an alleged tomb. The Arabs departed by train, but the fellows from hereabouts gossiped a bit, it seems, and the story was started that they'd been got rid of because the boss had hit on something, and wanted to be left to himself. "You haven't yet told us the name of the man," Anthony reminded him. "By Jove, no more I haven't. I'm so excited about everything. You won't know it, but Borrow will. Colonel Corkran." Anthony gave me a look. "I do know the name," he said. "It's the man of my dream." "The man of your dream? Corkran, a dream?" "A dream which has kept repeating itself till I grew superstitious about it. A red-faced man with a purplish sort of moustache I saw coming between you and us, or looking at me out of a dark recess, something like a deep doorway. Borrow said when I told him I was describing your man Corkran, whose place he took on your yacht Candace." "Well, I'm hanged! If that's not the rummiest go! I only hope he's not in that recess or deep doorway now, if it leads into your mountain. You remember, Borrow, my telling you he'd been alone for a while, in the sitting room I use as an office at the Semiramis Hotel, and had a good chance, if he wanted, to browse among my papers? Well, I didn't mention this to you at the time, but an unsigned contract with you for your services, in return for all my rights in the Mountain of the Golden Pyramid, was lying on the desk. As for the contract he's showing here, it could have only been for the trip, but it showed him to be my agent right enough. And there were 2 confidential letters on my desk, one from a man I'd written to, an Egyptological chap, saying in his opinion there might be a tomb in the mountain, the other, an answer, not finished, telling him I meant to run the risk, and had secured the rights. You know how queer I thought it, Corkran should throw up his job, which was paying him pretty well? But it wasn't my business, and I was jolly glad to be rid of him as it happened. Well, here we have the mystery explained." "Not quite yet, I wish we had," I said, thinking of the sly old poacher on our preserves, who had perhaps by this time skimmed the cream off the secret. It was easy to guess why he had sent away his workers, if indeed he had imagined himself on the eve of a discovery. Rights to Dick are given on the understanding that the Egyptian government shall have half of everything found, worth the taking. Corkran's scheme to be alone must mean that he intended annexing what treasure he could carry off, and then getting out of the bad business. Already 6 days had passed since the Arabs and the Nubians had left him alone in his camp, and, though it was lucky that we had learned what was going on, it might be too late to profit by the information. Even if we caught Corkran red-handed, he might have hidden his spoil where none but he, or some messenger, could ever find it. "You'll go with us out to the mountain, Sir Marcus?" I went on. "We'll be ready to start—" But Sir Marcus had suddenly become deaf. He had turned as if to gaze after the long ago departed train. Instead of answering me, he was stalking off toward a group of people at the far end of the platform, 3 ladies and 2 men in khaki. For a second I felt an impulse of indignation. Cheek of him to march away like that, not caring much that we had been robbed, largely through his carelessness and by one of his own men. But the indignation turned to surprise, sheer incredulous amazement. I glanced at Anthony to learn whether he had seen, but he was beckoning the old wise man of the desert. "Fenton," said I, "it seems we weren't the only passengers to get off here. There are 3 people we know, talking to 2 we don't." Anthony looked. "Great Scott!" said he, and in another instant we were following Sir Marcus hastily along the platform to greet, or scold, we weren't sure which it ought to be, the big-hatted, green-veiled, khaki-dressed but easily recognized figures of Bridget O'Brien, Monny Gilder, and Mrs. East. "We couldn't help it," Monny cried in self-defense to Anthony, before he had time to reach the group. "We knew you wouldn't let us come, so we came, because we had to be in this with you. Even Biddy wanted to, and she's so wise. As for Aunt Clara, I believe she'd have started off without us if we hadn't been wild for the journey. So you see how it was." We did see, and we couldn't help rejoicing in their pluck, as well as in the sight of them, though it was all against our common sense. "We've ordered our own camels, and a tent, and things to eat and drink, so we shan't be any bother to you," Monny went on, as Anthony rather gravely shook hands, his eager brows lifted, his eyes smiling in spite of himself. We couldn't have done it if it hadn't been for Slatin Pasha. We first went and confided everything to him, because we knew he loved adventures and would be sure to sympathize. These gentlemen from the camp are his friends, and they've organized our little expedition at his request. More than one person can use the telegraph, you know. And oh, won't it be lovely going with you out into the desert?" It was not yet evening when we set forth, but it was the birth of another day when we arrived within sight of Corcoran's camp. The tents glimmered pale in the light which comes up out of the desert before dawn, as light rises from the sea, and so deep was the stillness that it might have been a ghost camp. There was not even the howling of a dog, and this silence was more eerie than the silence of sleep in a lonely place, because of the tale a grandson of Asmack's had brought to the village. He was one of the Nubian men Corcoran had engaged to help his Arab workmen from the north, and when the whole gang had been discharged, he, suspecting that some secret thing was afoot, hid in the desert scrub that he might return by night to spy. He had wished his brothers to stay with him, but they, fearing the jinns who haunt the mountain and have power at night, refused and begged him to come away lest he be struck by a terrible death. The legend was that Queen Candace, the queen who ordered the making of the tomb, had been a witch. When she died, by her magic arts learned from the lost Book of Thoth, she had turned all those aware of the tomb's existence into jinns to guard the secret dwelling of her soul. Even the great men of the court, who by her wish hid in the mountain her body and jewels and treasure, became jinns the moment they had closed and concealed the entrance to the tomb. They could never impart the secret to mortals, and because of the knowledge which burned within their hearts, and the anguish of being parted forever from those they loved, the tortured spirits in prison grew malevolent. While the sun, still worshipped by them as Ra, was above the horizon, they had no power over men, but the moment that Ra died his red death, the jinns could destroy those who ventured within such a distance of the mountain as its shadow might reach. And if any man ventured nearer in the darkness of night, he heard the wailing of the spirits. Camp had been pitched beyond the shadow's farthest reach, but the night after the workmen were discharged, Asmack's one brave grandson had been led by curiosity to approach the haunted mountain. When he had crept within the trench most lately dug, he had heard the wicked voice of the jinns raging and quarrelling together. There had been a threatening cry when they knew how a man had defied their power, and the Nubian had escaped a fate too horrible to put into words, only by running until his breath gave out and the sun rose. The story gave the silent desert power even over European minds, as we came where the small camp glimmered, just outside the shadow's wicked circle. Not one of Asmack's men would go with us to the tent, which was evidently that of the leader. He might be lying there dead, struck by the jinns, they said, and all those who looked upon the body would be accursed. The three women would not have gone to Corcoran's tent, even had we allowed them to do so, and Sir Marcus, already a slave, though a willing one, stayed with his adored lady and her friends, inside the ring which the Nubians proceeded to make with the camels. Carrying a lighted lantern, Anthony and I walked alone to the tent. The flap was down, but not fastened, and the canvas moved slightly as if trembling fingers tried to hold it taut. "Colonel Corcoran!" I called out, sharply, but there was no answer. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 32. The Secret. Anthony lifted the flap, holding up the lantern, and we both looked in. No one was there, but the tent had the look of recent occupation. It was neatly arranged, as the tent of an old soldier should be, but on the table stood a half-used candle stuck in a bottle, and beside it a book lay open, face downward. Entering the tent, the first thing I did was to glance at the title of this book. It was a learned archaeological treatise. Here and there a paragraph was marked, and the leaves dog's-eared. 3 other volumes of the same sort were piled one upon the other. Anthony and I had read all four during the last few months, since our minds had concentrated on the subject of pyramids and rock tombs. "What do you think has become of Corcoran?" I said to Anthony. "I think the jinns have got him," he answered, gravely. "You mean—" "I don't know quite what I mean. But he must have hit upon something, and then have been prevented from coming back." "Why should he have had such luck, after a few weeks' work, an unscientific fellow like him, if the secret of the mountain has been inviolate for over 2,000 years? Wait and see what's happened to him before you call it luck, Duffer. But you must remember that nobody except Ferlini and a few superstitious blacks ever believed that the mountain had a secret. Incredulity has protected it. And Corcoran had to work like 1,000 devils if he hoped to get hold of anything before he was found out. I believe he has got hold of something, and that it then got hold of him. But we shall see." "Yes, we shall see," I repeated, "and before long if we too have luck. I hope it won't be the same kind as his. But come along out of this. We must get to work before sunrise, and try for a result of some sort before the worst of the heat. If he's found anything, we ought pretty quickly to profit by his weeks of frantic labour. That, maybe, will be our revenge." We had to tell the party what we had found in the tent, and what we meant to do next. Sir Marcus was now excused by Mrs. East, but until summoned by us the ladies were to remain where they were, under shelter of the tent which the camel boys were getting into shape. When exhorted to be patient, they received the advice in sweet silence, but we did not, until later, attach much importance to this unusual mood. Perhaps at that moment we were too preoccupied to notice expressions, even in the eyes we loved best. We took with us 2 men whom Asmack had provided as diggers, and in 5 minutes we were at the base of the little dark, conical mountain which for weeks had been the object of our dreams. Now, standing face to face with it, the glamour faded. The mountain of the Golden Pyramid was exactly like a dozen other tumbled shapes of black rock, grouped or scattered over the dull clay desert which many centuries ago had been the fertile realm of Candace. Why should a queen have selected it from among its lumpish fellows, to do it secret honour? But Corcoran had had faith. Here were traces of what Fenton called his frantic labours. A parallel trench had been dug with the evident object of unearthing a buried entrance into the mountain. Down it went, through hardened sand and clay, to a depth of 8 or 10 feet, and descending, we found, as we expected to do, several low tunnels driven at right angles toward the mountain itself. One after another we entered, crawling on hands and knees, only to come up against a solid wall of rock at the end. Each of these burrows represented just so much toil and disappointment. But Corcoran, whose undertaking could be justified even to his own mind only by success, had not been discouraged. The trench went round 3 sides of the mountain, as we soon discovered, and the corner of the 4th façade, not having yet been turned, it seemed a sign that Corcoran had, as Anthony said, hit upon something, or thought that he had done so. Otherwise he would not have discharged his men before the 4th gallery was begun. We had started from the south because our camp faced the long trench on that side, and it was quicker to jump into it than to walk round and examine the excavations from ground level. On the east, the plan of the work was the same as on the south, except that the tunnels leading mountainward were driven at different distances, relatively to each other, and each of these also ended in a cul-de-sac. Now remained in the trench on the north side of the mountain, which was the most promising direction for a find, and as we turned the corner which brought us into the 3rd trench the sun rose, making the sky blossom like the primrose fields of heaven. On this side, sand driven by the northerly wind which never rests itself, had banked itself high against the mountain, and the excavation had been a more serious task. There were only 2 tunnels, and into both sand had fallen. One was nearly blocked up, and impossible to enter without reopening, but we took it for granted hopefully that the second had been made later. This ran toward the mountain with a northeasterly slant, and, though it was partly choked by sand, it was possible to crawl in. Anthony insisted on going first. I followed, at the pace of my early ancestor the worm, and Sir Marcus comfortably waited outside. He wanted to be a pioneer only in financial paths, and after all this was our mountain now. It wasn't worth his while to be killed in it. Besides, as he pointed out, if anything happened to us there must be some one to organize a rescue, and break the news to the ladies. Anthony had a small electric torch, and I a lantern, but, going on hands and knees, we could use the lights only now and then. When we had crept ahead, descending always, for 12 or 15 feet, Anthony stopped. "Hullo!" I heard him call, in a muffled, reverberating voice. "Here's the reason why Corcoran sent his Arabs away." "What is it?" I yelled, my heart jumping. "The rock's been cut back by the hands of men." "His men, perhaps." "No, it isn't done like that nowadays. The tunnel turns here, dips down, and goes on along this flat wall. I bet Corcoran always kept ahead of the men. When he saw this he discharged his workers, and yet it may be nothing of importance after all. Only a flat surface for some old wall inscription such as Romans and even Egyptian soldiers made constantly on the march." The rumbling voice ceased as Anthony crawled round the turn of the passage. I followed, literally close on his heels, the burrow descending like a rabbit hole. Suddenly Anthony stopped again. "I've come into a sort of chamber Corcoran scooped out," I heard him say. "It's high enough to sit up in, no, to stand up in. This is the end of the passage, I think. By Jove, look out!" He had disappeared in the darkness behind a higher arch in the roof of the gallery. As he cried out, I slipped through after him, slid down a steep, abrupt slope, and by the light of my agitated lantern saw Anthony standing waist deep in a well-like hole, into which he had evidently stumbled. "Let me give you a hand up," I said. "No, thank you," he answered in a tense, excited voice. "This is where I want to be. Look!" I looked and saw, at the bottom of the scooped-out hole, a crevice in the flat wall of rock which we had been following down the passage, after its turn from the right angle to creep along the mountain-side. Out of this crevice protruded a large iron crowbar, apparently jammed into place, the first tool we had seen anywhere. The chamber in which I stood was littered and piled up with hard masses of earth, which had been thrown out of the hole, and on the rough floor of the latter I stepped on the spade which had done the work. It nearly turned my ankle as I jumped onto it, but I hardly felt the pain. Torch and lantern showed clearly that the crevice in the wall was not a natural crack, but a man-made opening. It was as if a slab of rock fitted roughly into grooves had first been lifted and had then fallen heavily onto the crowbar. I set the lantern on the earthy floor and its yellow light streamed through the crack, whence the crowbar protruded, like a black pipe in a negro's mouth. It was all darkness on the other side. From behind the screen of rock, set in its deep grooves, came the strangest sound I ever heard, or shall ever hear. It was a voice, groaning, yet it was not like a human voice. The horrid idea jumped into my head that it was the howl of an evil spirit sitting in a dead man's skull. "He's alive, then!" exclaimed Anthony, pale in the sickly light. "Is that you, Corcoran?" he called. The only answer was another groan. "I see the whole business now, don't you?" Fenton said. "This passage is very steep. Already it was far under ground level before we got to the cutting on the mountain wall, and it must have been under ground level for many centuries. They dug deep down to make the tomb, and then covered up the entrance with earth. When Corcoran got to his portcullis, he thought he'd reached the reward of his labours. Well, so he had, the punishment. Here's the heap of stone he used as a fulcrum for his lever. The heap tumbled when he was on the other side, and the slab of rock came down to trap him. We'll have to build up his fulcrum again before we can do anything ourselves." Together we forced the flat end of the crowbar into the crevice, pressed a piece of rock under it, and exerted all our strength. The slab moved upward an inch or two, grating in its rough grooves. The crack, no higher than the diameter of the crowbar plus a stone or two when we first saw it, was now twice its original height. In went another stone, and so on. We worked like demons in hell, and in an atmosphere almost as hot and breathless. Yet we could breathe. Whether all the air we got came through the long twisting passage Corcoran had made, or whether there were ventilation from the other side of the rock curtain, some opening in an unseen cave, we could not tell. All we knew was that the mountain had a secret, and that the man who had tried to rob us of our rights to it was caught in the trap of the djinns. Our rights! How fragile as spider-webs, how almost laughable they seemed down here! Rights we had bargained for with men, which they, not owning them, had gravely given. I suddenly realized, and I think Anthony realized, as sweating and silent we piled up the fulcrum of stone thrown down by the djinns, that they alone, or the sleeping queen they guarded, had rights in this hidden place. When we had raised the slab to a height of about 2 feet in its grooves, and had made sure that the stones held it firmly in place, we told each other that it was time to cross the threshold. The rock door was scarcely more than a yard in width, and we crawled through in single file, Anthony going ahead as before with his torch. I passed my lantern in after him, and then followed. As I crept through the narrow aperture I was conscious, among other emotions, of vague disappointment. If this is the way to a tomb, and the only way, there can't be anything very fine to discover, I said to myself. Why, the entrance isn't big enough to let in a decent-sized sarcophagus. It's the man of my dreams all right, and he's lying close to a deep-set doorway, like the one where I've seen him so often. I told you so, Anthony was saying in quite a commonplace voice, as I picked myself up on the other side of the rock screen. We were in a small chamber, more roughly hewn, and not so large as the inner sanctuary of Abu Simbel, which I had such good cause to remember. Exactly opposite the entrance by which we had come in was, as Anthony had said, a door, deeply set in the rock, a door of the same type as that through which we had passed, and in the shadow of the overhanging arch lay the heavy figure of Colonel Corkran, dressed in khaki. His eyes were open, but he did not stir as we bent over him. Only his lips moved slightly, as if he were making a grimace. "He's trying to ask for something to eat or drink," said Fenton. "What a confounded fool I am! I've nothing, not even a flask. Have you?" "No, I'll go back at once and get something," I answered. Strange, but I was not in the least angry with Corkran, whom I had been execrating. Perhaps this was partly because the impression that the djinns had sole rights here was growing stronger every moment. We were all interlopers, usurpers. Without stopping for more words, I turned my back to the secret still unsolved. To my surprise, however, I saw a light, stronger than our own, shining outside the partly raised screen of rock. Getting on my knees to crawl out, my face almost met the face of Monny Gilder, about to crawl in. Involuntarily I gave way, and in she crept like a big baby, Biddy coming after. Then we laughed, though I had seldom felt less like laughing. And the echo of our laughter was as if the spirits laughed behind our backs. "We never promised we wouldn't come," Monny hastily began, before Anthony could speak. "We just kept still. And Sir Marcus thought you wouldn't much mind, because the 2 nicest Nubians brought us quite safely. Oh, isn't it wonderful? And to be here when you opened that door. But, why, it isn't one of our men with you. It's the thief." "Don't call him names now, dearest," Bridget begged. "Poor wretch, he looks nearly dead. What a good thing we brought the biscuits and brandy." "I was going for some," I said. Not only had I got to my feet again, but had helped Biddy to hers, and Anthony had snatched his tall Monny up as if she had been a bundle of thistledown. The angels! It would never have done to tell them how glad we were that they had disobeyed us. It was Providence, apparently, not Marcus Lark, who had sent them to the rescue. "We thought perhaps if you found anything interesting you'd want to stay with it a long time," explained Monny. "That's why we brought you food and drink. It's a good thing we came, isn't it?" Fenton and I did not answer. Indeed, we occupied ourselves with ministering to the enemy, a few bits of crumbled biscuit, a few drops of brandy to moisten them. He mumbled and swallowed and choked, and slowly the veinous red came back to the flabby grey cheeks, with their prickles of sprouting beard. "It's fresh air he needs now," said Anthony. "He won't die from 2 or 3 days fasting, not he. And it can't be more, for it would have taken him days and nights of hard work to get here, after his men were sent off. Jove, I believe it's more funk than anything else that's laid him low. Thought he was done for and all that. Look, there's his candle lantern upset on the floor. It couldn't have been very gay for him when the light went out. Lend a hand, Duffer, and we'll give him to the Nubians the girls have brought. They'll carry him to his own tent. He never got as far as the second door here, so we needn't search him. Otherwise I would, like a shot." Yes, it was something higher than a mere financier who sent the girls to us in the antechamber of the secret. We could not, for their own sakes, have risked bringing them. But here they were, and we should always have this memory together, we told ourselves, though we did not tell the disobedient ones. That would have been a bad precedent. What there was to see, they would see with us, and even the djinns could not work harm to angels. We went out and collected more stones with which to prop up the second screen of rock, which was not so thick as the first, and used Corcoran's spade to hold it up at last. Beyond was another roughly hewn chamber, and at the far end, set in a curiously fitted frame of wood, a wooden door, looking almost as new as though it had been made yesterday. Anthony flashed his electric torch over it, and we saw the grain of deal. There was a bronze lock, and a latch of strange, crude workmanship which Monty touched deprecatingly. "May I?" she half whispered. For to her also the place was haunted. She seemed to ask permission of spirits rather than of her lover. But the latch did not move. "It would be sacrilege to break the lock," she said. "What shall you do?" "Take the door off its supports. They're not hinges," Fenton answered, in the queer, low tone which somehow we all instinctively adopted. "We've got one or two implements that may help to do the trick." He worked cautiously, even tenderly, for this Queen's secret was our secret in the finding, even if the right to it was in the keeping of the djinns. Monty held my lantern, and it was a good half-hour before Anthony and I together could carefully lift the deal door, unbroken, from its place. Still Monty held the lantern, and at the threshold of a dimly seen room beyond, we all drew back, for on the sanded floor were footprints. To them the girl pointed, her eyes turning to Anthony's face, as if to ask, "How can it be that anyone came in, when the door was locked, and there was that screen of rock to raise?" But as we looked, over one another's shoulders, we realized that the prints were not made by modern boots. They were the marks of sandals, and they went across the floor to a thing that glittered in the middle of the room, a vague shape like a draped coffin, with something high and pointed on top, crossed to a glittering table on which a ray from the lantern revealed offerings to the dead, a loaf, a roasted duck, its wings neatly tied with string, cakes and fruit, all dried and blackened, but perfect in form, and a saucer of incense, from which a little ash had fallen from a ghostly pastille onto the table. There the sandalled feet had paused, while the incense caught a spark, and moving on had walked straight to the door. A faint fragrance from perfume jars came to our nostrils, a strange, subtle fragrance still, though most of its sweetness had gone, leaving more marked the smell of fat which had held the perfume all these years, while civilizations grew up and perished. The man who had lit the incense and locked the door seemed to have hurried back from who knew where to stand behind us, saying, "I forbid you entrance, in the name of the ancient gods." We could not see him nor hear his voice, but we could feel that he was there, and something in us revolted against the ruthlessness of disobeying, of forcing our way into the room in spite of him, to crush his footprints with ours. "Why does the sand glitter so?" Monty asked. "Everything glitters. Everything looks as if it were made of gold." "The mountain of the golden pyramid," Biddy murmured. "Go in, first, you two, and bless the place," I said, my heart wildly beating. They obeyed for once, moving delicately as if to music which ears of men were not fine enough to hear. They went hand in hand, and as Monty, in her straight, pale-tinted dress, held up the lantern, I thought of the wise Virgin. When this room had last been lighted, the parable of the Virgins of the Lamps was yet unspoken. "It is not sand," said Monty, gasping a little in the heavy air. "It is sprinkled gold dust. Now it is on the soles of our feet. It shines, it shines." Anthony and I followed, still with that curious sense of hesitation, as if we ought to apologize to someone. The room of the dead was very close, and we drew our breath with difficulty for a moment. But the discomfort passed. Mechanically we avoided the footmarks printed in gold, avoided them as if they had been covered by invisible feet. Monty was right. Everything was gold, and it shone, it shone. Dust from the terrible mines of Nub, whence the convict miners never returned, lay thickly scattered over the rock floor. The walls of rock were plastered with gold leaf, as high as the low ceiling, and upon the ceiling itself, on a background of deep blue colour, was traced in gold the form of Nut, goddess of night, her long arms outspread across an azure sky of golden stars. The table of offerings was decorated with gold in barbaric patterns, and the saucer which held the burnt pastille of incense was of gold, crudely designed but beautiful. Cloth of gold, soft as old linen, draped a coffin in the centre of the room, and hid the conical object on the coffin's lid. On a sudden, half-savage impulse I lifted the covering, with a pang of fear lest the fabric should drop to pieces. But it did not. Its limp yet heavy folds fell across my feet, as I stood looking at the wonderful thing it had concealed. There was no sarcophagus of stone. The doors leading to the rock tomb were not large enough to have admitted one. Instead, there was an extraordinarily high, narrow coffin or mummy case, richly gilded and decorated with intricate designs different from any I had seen in the museum at Cairo. The top of the case represented the figure of a woman, with a smiling golden face, painted lips and hair. But the strangeness and wonder were under the long eyelids and in the woman's hands. The slanting eyes had each an immense cabochon emerald set for its iris, set round with brilliant stones like diamonds, curiously cut. And the carved, gilded hands of wood, with realistic fingers, wearing rings, were clasped round a pyramid of gold. This it was which had betrayed its conical shape through the drapery of gold cloth. The opening in the miniature pyramid was not concealed. There was a little door, guarded by a tiny golden sphinx, and on the neck of the sphinx, suspended by a delicate chain, was a bell. "It is to call the spirit of the Queen, if a profane touch should violate her tomb," Fenton said, dreamily. He was beginning to look like a man hypnotized. Perhaps it was the close air, with its lingering perfume of 2,000 years ago. Perhaps it was something else, more subtle, something that we could all feel, as one feels the touch of a living hand that moves under a cloak. No one spoke for an instant. I think we half expected the bell to ring. Then Fenton said, "Monty, you and Mrs. O'Brien must choose which is to have the privilege of finding out the secret of the Golden Pyramid. The Duffer and I want it to be one of you." "Oh no, not I!" cried Monty, almost angrily. "Nor I," Biddy firmly echoed. "Duffer, the papers were yours. Will you—" Anthony began. "No, it was your faith in the mountain that brought us to it," I reminded him. "It ought to be you." If it ought to be any of us," Monty broke in, with a little breathless catch in her voice. But what do you mean?" Anthony turned an odd, startled look upon the girl. "I hardly know what I mean. Only, I couldn't touch anything here. They are hers. They've been hers for 2,200 years. I never thought I should feel like this. I'd rather drop dead this minute than try to take that little pyramid out of those golden hands. They've clasped it so long. She wanted so much to keep the secret, Anthony. This is the strongest feeling that ever came into my heart, except love for you. This feeling that we have no right, that it would be monstrous to rob this queen." "It wouldn't be robbing," Anthony said heavily. "We have the right—" "Oh, I wonder," Biddy whispered. "What would become of museums if everybody felt as you suddenly feel, or think you feel," Fenton went on. "If it were wrong to open tombs, the best men in Egypt—" "Not wrong, perhaps," Monty explained. "But oh, I'm sure you understand. I'm sure in your hearts you both, you men, feel just as we do now we're in this wonderful secret place. That something forbids— I don't know whether it's something in ourselves or outside, but it's here. It says, 'No, whatever others do, you cannot do this thing.' If you didn't feel it, you would have taken the pyramid out of those poor hands, and tried to tear off the rings, and open the coffin itself to get at the mummy. But you haven't, either of you. You don't want to do it. You can't. I dare one of you to tell me it's only for Biddy and me that you've kept your hands off." "We've come a long way, and have done a good deal to find this secret that we expected Egypt to give us," I said, dully, instead of answering her challenge. Monty had no argument for me. She turned to Anthony. "The secret you expected Egypt to give?" she echoed. "And hasn't Egypt given you a secret?" "Yes," said Anthony. "Egypt has given us a secret, the greatest secret of all. But— Is there a but? I wonder if that isn't the only secret which one can open and learn by heart, without breaking the charm?" Biddy seemed to be speaking to herself, but we heard. "The secret of love goes on forever being a secret, doesn't it, the more you find out about it, just as the world and its beauty grows greater and more wonderful the higher you climb up a mountain? But other secrets, you find them out and they're gone, like a bright soap bubble. Nothing can mend broken romance." "If we didn't touch anything here, what a memory this would be to carry away," Monty said. "Don't you remember, Anthony, my saying once how I loved to dream of all the beautiful lost things, hidden beneath the sea and earth, never to be found while the world lasts, and stuck miserably under glass cases? You said you felt the same in some moods. I love those moods. I feel so about things in general," Anthony admitted. "It was my romantic side you appealed to. Have you a better side?" "No better, but more practical. This isn't things in general. It's a thing particular, personal and definite. If we should be quixotic enough not to take what we've earned the right to take, we should be called fools. Instead of claiming our half, the Egyptian government would get all." "Let it!" Monty cried. "A government is a big, cold, soulless impersonality. It could never know the thrill that's in our blood this wonderful minute, or miss the thrill if it were destroyed. Do you mind being called a fool, Anthony? And you, Lord Ernest?" Anthony was silent, but something made me speak. "I don't mind. You know I've always been a duffer." "Our future largely depends on this," Fenton persisted, with a conscientious wish to persuade us, and himself. "I believe it does," Monty strangely agreed with him. "What do you mean?" Anthony's voice was suddenly sharp with some emotion, which sounded more like anxiety than anger. "Do you mean that if Ernest, Borrow and I insist on our rights to whatever treasure is hidden here, you and Mrs. O'Brien will think less of us?" "Not less. Nothing you could do would make us think less, after all that has happened to us together. But could it ever be as it has been, as beautiful, as sweet, with all the dearest kind of romance in our thoughts of you? You see, you have the glory of finding the secret. Queen Candace saved it for you. She wouldn't give it to such a man as Colonel Corkran. She knew he wouldn't respect her. Maybe she hoped you would. I seem to hear her saying so. All this gold, and the treasure we haven't seen, is hers. It's been hers for more than 2,000 years. Why should we steal it? We aren't a horrid, cold government. It won't be our fault, whatever a government may choose to do. She'll know that, and so shall we. Besides, we can beg to have the tomb kept like this for a great shrine of the Marrow. Our memory of this place can't have the glamour torn away, whatever happens. Nothing sordid will come between it and us, as it would if... Why, after all, where's the great difference between opening the coffin of a woman dead thousands of years ago, or a few months? Supposing people wanted to dig up Queen Elizabeth to see what had been buried with her? Or Napoleon? What an outcry there'd be all over the world! This poor queen is defenceless, because her civilization is dead too. Could you force open the lid of her coffin, Lord Ernest, and take the jewels off her neck?" "Just now I feel as if I couldn't," I confessed humbly. "And you, Anthony? What if I died, and asked to have the jewels I loved, because you'd given them, put on my body, to lie there till eternity, and—" "Don't," Anthony cut her short. "There are some things I can't listen to from you. And some things you can't do. You may think you could, but go ahead and take the golden pyramid out of those golden hands, if you can." "I shall not take it," said Anthony. "I shall never take it now. You must know that." "I'm not saying I shan't go on loving you if you go against me. I shall love you always. I can't help that. But—" "That's it, the but. Let it all go. At least we've had the adventure, and we've got love. I don't want the treasure now, or the secret. I give up my part in them forever." "For me?" "Yes, for you, but there's something more. Another reason?" "I think so. Frankly, it isn't all for you. Only you've made me feel it. Without you I might have felt it, but too late. If there's a drop of Egyptian blood in my veins, why, yes, it must be that, telling me the same thing that you have told. This Egyptian queen may lose her treasure, and must lose her secret, but it won't be through me. And because you wouldn't steal them, she has given you the secret and the treasure, the best of both, with her royal blessing," Biddy said. "This is what Ferlini's papers, and the legends, really meant for you and Ernest. Everything that's happened, not only in Egypt, but in our whole lives, has been leading up to the discovery of the treasure and the secret that we can take without stealing. Do you know what I'm talking about? And if you do, was it worth coming so far to find, this treasure that I mean, and the secret?" "We know very well," Anthony said, "and you know that we realize it was worth journeying to the end of the world for, or into the next." "Or into the next," Monty echoed. "Here we're on the threshold of the next. That's why the Queen's blessing feels so near." The End. End of chapter 32. End of It Happened in Egypt. Read by Sibella Denton in October-November 2007 in Carrollton, Georgia.